Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. And we got to get into this Israel versus Hezbollah situation because that may be where World War III kicks off. Be sure to wipe your feet. You're in the House of Revolution. I mean, hit the like button, like, share, subscribe, support the platform. But we need to dig deep into this because Netanyahu is a war criminal. He see Joe Biden as weak. So he need to make sure Trump or anybody come in saving him and saving Israel. But the only way to have Israel saved respectfully, they just can't say, hey, we need help versus militia like Hamas. But everyone knows that Hezbollah is a different animal. And they are provoking Hezbollah to start this war, drag the U.S. in, so we save Israel and also save Netanyahu. This is very disgusting, but Hezbollah is warning them that they're willing to give them so much punishment, it won't be an Israel.
One topic that you see on the news almost every day is whether the Israelis are going to go to war with Lebanon. It's a very, very interesting topic, and you guys know that I've done a lot of coverage about Hezbollah and how they've been destroying Israel's defenses. And now the Israelis are very angry because they're losing in Gaza, and they're also being crushed in the north, so in the front with South Lebanon, with Hezbollah, and they can't do anything about it. And what they're trying to achieve now is a pivot from Gaza over to Lebanon, hoping that that's going to kind of wash away their failures inside of Gaza, their military and political failures in Gaza. I'll play you some clips and I'll go more into detail about whether there's going to be a war or not. This is from David Menser, who's the same guy that you might know from Labor Friends of Israel, right? So very funny on the eve of Keir Starmer coming to power. But he's now the Israeli spokesperson. And take a look at what he had to say about Lebanon.
We will use all means necessary to restore security on our northern border. The state of Lebanon and the Hezbollah terror organization, which is operating under the guidance of Iran, bears full responsibility for the deterioration of the security situation in the north, in violation of UN Security Council resolutions 1559 and 1701. Whether diplomatically or militarily, one way or another, we will ensure the safe and secure return of Israelis to their homes in northern Israel. That is not up for negotiation. We will use all means necessary to restore security on our northern border. The state.
So he seems very to try and calm down Hezbollah. Now, they're trying to do this because France has a little bit of sway and influence inside of Lebanon because it used to be a former colony. They call it a mandate. It's not. And they're hoping that they can achieve something through that. But they're not going to. They're not going to because they won't stop bombing Lebanon, right? So just yesterday, they're dropping white phosphorus. And again, when I say bombing Lebanon, like it's really a vicious, nasty bombing campaign. It's not like they confine it to military things. It's no, let's bomb children, let's drop white phosphorus, let's kill civilians. I think they've killed close to 100 civilians in South Lebanon, whereas Hezbollah have killed one Israeli civilian, if you can call Israeli civilians, because they all have mandatory military service. But anyway, maybe it was a grandmother or something. I don't know. In any case, they won't calm down. So Hezbollah are continuing to pound the border. They don't care. They really do not give a shit. So all of this diplomatic pressure that they're trying to exert, all of this, sending the head of German intelligence to Beirut, it's not working. Hezbollah don't care. Hezbollah's official position is when you stop the genocide in Gaza, then we will stop. We will listen to what Hamas tell us, okay? And you have to understand the dynamic here, because when they say that, they're not saying like, oh, well, we have nothing to do with it, go talk to Hamas. They really mean it. They're not just saying that. They really mean this. They say it's up to Hamas. You stop the genocide, we stop. And the same thing with the Yemenis. they say you want these people on Galaxy Leader to be freed. Go talk to Hamas, stop the genocide in Gaza. Then we will release these hostages and we'll lift the blockade. But you go deal with the Palestinians. You're not going to deal through us. So I think that's very interesting dynamic to point out. And Iran is also rebuffing these these positions by saying if you screw with Lebanon, there's going to be a regional war, right? Like that's the
Now, maybe 2 days ago, I seen something in the news, Middle East news, really shocked me and showed me that war is on the rise. Saudi Arabia and the Arab kingdoms, the Sunni kingdoms, I'll put it like that, they took Hezbollah off their list of terrorist organizations. Now, why is that? Why is that important? Because if Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all these other United Arab Emirates and those nations, Kuwait, if they've taken Hezbollah, Egypt, off of the terrorist watch list, they only did that because the U.S. told them to. That means now they can arm Hezbollah. And why did they say they did it? Because they say Israel is threatening Hezbollah for no reason. Revolutionary salute, family. So that also was a sign that World War III is on the rise, and they getting ready to ship arms to Lebanon so it can be fought right there. That's why Saudi Arabia did that. It had no other reason to take Shiite Hezbollah off a terrorist list unless they plan on backing Iran to fight Israel through Hezbollah, and that's what they're gonna do.
When it comes to direct
Same
involvement,
thing NATO doing with Ukraine.
that's the red line.
Arabs plan on doing that.
If you invade Lebanon, we're coming in. That's what the Iranians have been saying. Okay, so you've had the foreign minister, you've had also Karazi, who is head of Iran's Strategic Council on Foreign Relations. All of them saying, like Iran's not interested in a regional war, but if you want to take it there, we're ready to do this. Okay, so there's no one is backing down here. The Yemenis are not backing down. Hamas, Hezbollah are not backing down. Iran is not backing down. They have a very, very clear position. If you want any sort of peace on the northern border or in South Lebanon, you stop the genocide in Gaza. It's the same condition that was set out from day one. But the Israelis don't want to stop the genocide, so they're in a very precarious dilemma right here, right? They want to commit genocide, but they don't want any consequences for committing genocide. It's a very you have to sympathize, right? The poor Israelis. What can they do? Why can't they just commit genocide in peace? No one will let them. So anti-Semitic. So I'll show you some new videos released by Hezbollah, which are also, obviously these have propaganda value, but they're also very interesting to us as journalists and military observers, and just the fact that they are releasing this at this moment in time, it's also to send a message to the Israelis, right? Make no mistake. The message is that we are ready for you, and we have weapons that you don't even know exist, and that you don't even know we possess. And make no mistake, the Israelis are very, very angry about that.
Israel know you're going to face destruction like you never seen. You won't walk. It won't be one-sided.
Hezbollah are not playing around. They're really not playing around. Like I want to impress upon you the importance of their military and strategic strength, because it's not like, oh, they have some projectiles that they can fire. No. We're not talking about a bunch of mortar shells. They have rockets. They have missiles. They have surveillance drones. They have kamikaze or suicide drones. They have their own their own production for their own rockets and missiles. I mean, if you look at, I'm saying both rockets and missiles now, they probably have 1 million of those, right? 1 million in total. In addition to that, all of the mortar shells, the artillery, the conventional artillery shells, I haven't even mentioned, of course, assault rifles, machine guns, and stationary. Forget about it. You're dealing with a military wing that has had the advantage of not being under siege. So if you look at the strength that Hamas have in Gaza under siege, which is already very impressive, and they've prevented the Israelis from achieving any of their objectives, then what do you think Hezbollah can do? Hezbollah have had the advantage.
But that's why they're going to pull the U.S. in. See, they don't want to fight Hezbollah by themselves, but they don't have to, because they know if we fight Hezbollah, we're going to get totally annihilated. They're going to seize land. It's going to humiliate NATO. So automatically the U.S., Britain, France, they're going to help Israel. But that is the battle and the ceasefire negotiation Israel will settle for, because I'm telling you right now, that will mean NATO had to ceasefire as well. So they won't just be the laughing joke. If they do it right now with Hamas, it's all on them. It's going to be their humiliation. They want to make it a whole Western humiliation, because they're going to lose anyway. NATO not going to defeat what Hezbollah, Iran, and them Arab nations got put together for their ass. Remember that. But Netanyahu is going to make sure he get a deal to where he don't got to, remember, he got an international criminal court warrant. He want to make sure he don't go to prison and he get immunity, and then the ceasefire come. But that only come with going to war with Hezbollah.
Of building tunnels, of making their own weapons, of receiving weapons through from Iran through Iraq and Syria, and stockpiling those for decades and decades and decades, right? So this is going to be a war that the Israelis are going to be crushed in, absolutely crushed in. I remember in 2006 how they were crushed, and the Israelis had to end that after 33 days, right? And of course they will tell you, oh, they won. Really? Because Hezbollah are right here and they're stronger than you. What did you win exactly? You got spanked and humiliated and sent out of Lebanon. So, they are really, really in a bad spot. And well, it's a good spot for the rest of the world, but bad for them. I'll show you some more videos just to kind of, again, impress upon you the sophistication that we're dealing with. Look at this coming out of the ground. I mean, forget fighters coming out of the ground. They've got the Katyushas coming out of the ground now. I mean, forget about it. Like, okay, you spot one of them. Maybe you find two of them. You're not going to find all of them.
It's thousands of those laying around.
It's really impressive. I mean, for a non-state actor, remember that Hezbollah, yes, they're a political party. Yes, they have their political and their social wings, but their military wing, I mean, it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world, and there's never been anything like it in history.
Nope.
That a non-state actor has so much firepower and so much technical prowess doesn't exist. Never existed in history. So the fact that they're able to confront the Israelis, the United States, the United Kingdom, and at the same time resist through other channels and avenues, meaning diplomatic and political avenues, it's unbelievable. It really is a force to be reckoned with. And the Israelis are screwed. And when they start sending in the Americans and the French and the Germans to help them out, you know that they're screwed, because this is what they always do, right? They'll try and fight skirmishes or fight a war, and then to seal the deal at the end and get out of trouble, they will ask the Western diplomats to come in and try and cool down Hezbollah. But it's not going to work this time, because we're not dealing with ordinary circumstances. We're dealing with a genocide in Gaza, with an extermination. I don't give a crap what you call it, but it's not good, and Hezbollah don't like it, and the world doesn't like it. And it's not going to stop on the northern border until Israel stops, right? This is the condition. It's not going to change. And, they don't seem to want to get it, but okay. Here you've got, for example, some other photos and clips from Hezbollah where they're showing, for the first time, by the way, they've revealed some weapons and systems like the M46 over here. This is modified by the Syrians as well. I can show you also drills from the artillery, units of Hezbollah that we haven't seen before.
ايه هاي ايه يلا يلا اتكل على الله اتكل على الله يا قائد محمد
All militaries hate those mortar shells. Scared to death.
Speaking of which, you see the snow on the mountains in the back. I mean, they also have their own. They have their own units for cold weather. You know, with white camouflage and everything. It's quite amazing. It really is. It's quite formidable. They released a clip for that, but that was before October 7th, before Al-Aqsa flood. Here you can see the photo that I showed you just now with the M46. It's from this clip. They got all sizes and all ordnances and all calibers and all payloads that you can imagine. You can see the Burkan there as well, which is, I mean, a hefty thing. It carries like, 300 to 500 kilo
destroy headquarters
warheads. And I mean, that absolutely annihilates anything it lands on. Also has psychological effect on the enemy as well, given the loud bang that it produces, right? So in the last 24 hours, Hezbollah have launched about 200 rockets and 20 drones against the Israelis because the Israelis assassinated a commander in Hezbollah. And it's like they don't learn. They say they don't want war with Lebanon, and then they go and they assassinate multiple leaders in Hezbollah. And then they send in the diplomats who to beg and plead on their behalf. And then they keep assassinating these leaders and expecting it to weaken the resistance, and it won't happen. It's like, on one hand, it's like, okay, well, please keep doing it because you're just going to make the resistance stronger, if that's what it is. And you're going to do it anyway. You might as well sink yourself faster for us and for the world and do us a lot of good. But really, it's just unbelievable. I mean, look, everything is literally on fire. Okay, I'll just show you some of the Israeli settlements. And I know I've shown you many clips, but these are the latest ones that we have. This is
they done made all those people evacuate from their territory. See, who Hezbollah said they're gonna seize all this land if they go to war with Israel.
they don't even have enough firefighters to deal with all of these infernos. So you see that from any way that you look at it, they are in dire straits. And I'll just read to you from so this is from Professor Asad Abu Khalil, who is someone I admire very much. Interviewed him about 2 months ago, and I agree very much with the thesis that he lays out in this piece about whether there's going to be war or not. And he makes some very good points. The fact that the Israelis, they need a military victory because they've ballsed up Gaza, right? The fact that Hezbollah just won't, they are unrelenting. He also mentions another avenue that we've discussed before. For example, the opposition that you have inside of Lebanon to Hezbollah. For example, from the Kata'ib, from the Phalange, who are these nut job so-called Christians. And of course, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they also exert a significant influence in Lebanon through various media organizations as well, in addition to political. So that's one avenue that has to be taken into consideration. He also mentions the elections, the fact that, Biden did nothing to stop the genocide. So, why would he necessarily jump in to stop a war? If you look at Donald Trump as well, they're both, mad, rabid Zionists. So why would any of them actually do anything? They don't want a regional war, but it's not like they're actually going to set any red lines. I think that's one thing worth underscoring as well. And he mentions the fact that inside of Israel, you have these divisions. You have Netanyahu who's dealing with all his political cases. So, it's not going to be 2006. It's going to be worse than that for the Israelis. Much, 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 much worse. The equation has also changed, right? So, Israel is not only being confronted by a much stronger resistance, but they are unable to defend themselves from that resistance, or to face that resistance by themselves. They need the help of all these countries, right? And he mentions, for example, April 13th, when you had Jordan helping to shoot down Iranian payloads. So, and of course, the UK and the US and France, who all have destroyers in the Red Sea, there to help defend the Israeli colony. So Israel is weak. It's not able to contend with non-state actors, right? Never mind if it goes into a regional war, and then you have Iran also getting involved again, like on April 13th, and to a much, much, much larger and further extent. So in any case, it's a good read, and I agree a lot with what he has to say. And I thought I'd just inject that at the end as well. And it's just funny listening to Israeli media talk about this, because they seem very, very worried about it. But they're still trying to make it, it's about the Shiite axis. Man, they don't get bored, their whole colony is about to be blown up, and they're still regurgitating this bullshit propaganda about, the Iranian Shiite axis. No, man, it's not because they're Shiites. It's because you're shit, right? Because you're colonizers and you piss people off because you murder them. That's why people are firing rockets at you. They want you to fuck off their land. They try so hard to make it about everything else in the world except this, or it's because they're Jewish and everyone is just anti-Semitic. They just wake up in the morning and say, I want to kill Jews. It's everything except colonialism, right? Everything in the world. So in any case, it's funny listening to the Israelis. They don't know what to do, and they're all running away. They're all running away. Last month when Nasrallah was the Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave a speech. You had I don't recall the number. I think it must have been 65,000, 60,000 Israelis leaving in one day. So, you've had significant portions of Israelis leaving the colony entirely. And especially in the north on this front in southern Lebanon, you have the Israelis being evacuated by their own government, by the colonial administration in Tel Aviv. And in addition to that, being forced out because of the fires, right? So it's not just the war itself; it's just the fires as a result of the drones coming in, as a result of the Iron Dome having been destroyed by Hezbollah. You see, it's like dominoes, right? Or salami tactic, if you will. Very, very, very well executed by Hezbollah, and at the same time, without turning it into a regional war, which is unbelievably impressive. Again, from a purely objective point of view, it's very difficult to destroy an entire line of defense like that without turning it into a larger, protracted conflict. And so they've been able to actually pull that off, which is very impressive. And now, of course, they're talking about, there might be a regional war, but again, Professor Abu Khalil makes the point that the Israelis like to take people by surprise. So the fact that everyone's talking about it would maybe dissuade them from actually doing anything at the moment, but not entirely or indefinitely. Now, from what I can see, and again, I don't want to make any predictions because it's a war, it's chaos, so there's nothing to be predicted in it. But I will say that I think it's going to escalate. I don't know when, but I don't think it's going to become a regional war in the sense that the media are trying to make it out to be. You know, like it very well could. Again, it very well could. Nothing is off the table. We're not anywhere near this genocide in Gaza stopping or the colony being actually finally done, even though you have all these settlers who are leaving. Nevertheless, it's still not safe. It's still not safe to say, but I think it's going to escalate a bit. And I think that ultimately, even if the Israelis try to go in, they won't be able to go past southern Lebanon. They'll of course they'll go and bomb Beirut, and they'll level Beirut like they always do. But I think it's going to be more difficult. I don't think they'll be able to keep it up for as long as they want. I mean, some Israelis in the military are saying that they might not even last 24 hours. Who knows? Again, who knows? Again, Hezbollah's arsenal is very, very secret. And like I was saying, the Israelis want to know what kind of weapons they have and where they are, but they haven't been able to make Hezbollah go and use those weapons that they're saving for a rainy day. So far, they've used very conventional and already public weapons and systems. So the Israelis haven't been able to really discern or gather any valuable intelligence from that. So there is a real risk of a war. Make no mistake. If you ask me, it's already a regional war. I mean, Jesus Christ, there's 7 fronts in the war. I've been saying that since the very beginning. It's already regional for me. If they mean invading Lebanon, yeah, it could happen. But the Israelis would have a very difficult time. And let's hope it doesn't come to that. Ultimately, their project is failing. So you have to remember that there are many Israelis right now who, you know, they just don't care. They want to flee. Like, they're ready to kill people for their colonial project, but they're not ready to die for it. Do you understand the difference? Palestinians are ready to die for it because they don't have anywhere else to go, and you know they are attached to the land. The Israelis are not attached to the land. They're a bunch of Eastern Europeans, you know, or whatever. Even if they come from Morocco, they're not from Palestine. So you know they have somewhere else to go. They can go to other countries, and they have other options that Palestinians do not have, because Palestinians didn't come and settle the land. They are from the land. They're native to the land, indigenous to the land. So the Israelis are ready to kill, but not to die for the land. And that is a very important factor. And it's true in Gaza, and it's also true in the Galilee and in Lebanon. So when it comes down to it, they will prefer to flee, as they have been doing in droves through Ben Gurion Airport. And I know the resistance like to strike Ben Gurion sometimes, but I suggest they leave it open so that the settlers can flee in peace like the French did from Algeria, and then we save everybody a bunch of time and trouble, and perhaps the most diplomatic way to settle things. Wouldn't you agree? Right? We should leave departing flights from Ben Gurion open for all the settlers to leave, and we settle the thing peacefully, and that's it. But make no mistake, the risks are very real. And the Americans and the Germans and the French are not going to be able to calm down Hezbollah like they have always done, or think that they can do during, for example, the Karish gas field incident, when they sent Amos Hochstein to negotiate the maritime border issue, and other times. It's not going to happen. The red line is very clear. It's the Gaza genocide. They want that to stop, and then we can talk. Nothing before that. And they're ready to go as long as it takes. Make no mistake, and they can do that, unlike the Israelis. Again,
they're helping them. Right now, they're talking about that Netanyahu is going to attack Hezbollah in the coming weeks. And what's your understanding on the Biden's policy in Gaza right now, considering what's going on with him in this 2024 presidential election?
Well, Biden's hamstrung. On the one hand, he recognizes that the United States is paying a horrific price for supporting Israel, that we're losing credibility around the world, nations, especially at a time, again, to bring in BRICS, when BRICS is challenging the hegemony, American hegemony, with a multilateral model, and challenging the United States in the developing South to say we're the better model. Don't go with the United States. This is critical because the United States is trying to mount a challenge to China in the Pacific. The ASEAN members, when they look at the United States, they're looking at a nation that has no credibility anymore. That's lost, doesn't stand for anything, and increasingly the BRICS model is looking like the better option. This is devastating for American foreign policy. But on the other hand, the extent to which the pro-Israeli lobby controls politics in America today is manifest. And so Biden can't afford to walk away from Israel or to be seen as opposing Israel. Look at the debate. I mean, basically, Donald Trump said that I'll enable Israel to kill more Palestinians when I'm president, implying that somehow Biden is holding Israel back from committing genocide. Neither one of those postures is going to do America well on the international stage, but domestically, that's what counts right now. And it's Biden's great vulnerability that he is being perceived by the pro-Israeli lobby and the voters in America that are responsive to that lobby as being soft on terrorism, soft on Hamas, soft on Hezbollah. But Biden knows one thing, at least his administration knows one thing, that if Israel goes into a full-scale war with Hezbollah, Israel is probably going to be destroyed, that it's the end of Israel. Israel can't survive that fight. Hezbollah has the ability to blanket Israel with accurate long-range missiles from head to toe, from left to right, that Israel can't shoot down. Moreover, if Israel aggressively strikes Lebanon in an effort to knock Hezbollah out of the fight, Iran will join the fight. And again, Israel's not ready to deal with that, that this becomes a war of existential survival for Israel, immediate existential survival. I mean, Israel's already in an existential struggle in the long term because Israel's become an unsustainable concept of a nation. It just can't function viably over time now because of what it's done and how it's positioned in the world. But if they invade Hezbollah, or they attack Hezbollah, invade Lebanon, this will accelerate the process of Israel's demise. And the Biden administration knows that. So they're doing their best to try and convince Israel not to attack. But here's the problem. This isn't about Israel. This is about Netanyahu. This is Netanyahu's personal ambition. This is Netanyahu insisting that his legacy not be one of a failed leader, but of a successful leader, a leader who stood up for the security of Israel, not a leader that betrayed the security of Israel. Without a war against Hezbollah, Netanyahu will find it difficult to remain in power. And so we're at one of those impossible situations where everybody knows, the Israeli Defense Force knows that if they go to war against Hezbollah, that they will lose that war. They know this. But to challenge, here's the real problem, to challenge Netanyahu could create the conditions for a civil war in Israel. Because if the military challenges civilian leadership, that's a fundamental split from past practice. And then you will see that there will be elements, the West Bank settlers, the far right will rally behind Netanyahu, and we could see fighting in the streets. Even before the Hamas conflict, remember, there was already significant domestic unrest against Netanyahu because of his desire to bring under control the judiciary in violation.
You got 60,000 ultra-Orthodox extremist settler Jewish individuals that they didn't used to have to fight in the military. They was exempt. Well, they just passed a law saying BS because they need all bodies, all hands on deck, just like their people in Ukraine. They need all hands on deck. So those religious extremists might start a civil war as well.
Of the basic laws of Israel. Israel has no constitution, but they do have basic laws. And this put hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets. And it got to the point where the president of Israel said that there's a real risk that Israel will fall into civil war, not civil conflict, not civil unrest, civil war. That implies organized formations on either side fighting against each other. Well, if you had the potential for civil war prior to October 7th, you have the potential for civil war today. And that's one of the reasons why the Israeli military isn't doing what it must do at this point in time, is to stand up to Netanyahu and say, no, we're not going in there. Because to do that could create a civil war where radicalized reserve units of Talmudic scholars who are 100% behind the genocidal policies in Gaza face off against more professional units that recognize the futility of trying to win a war that can't be won. And the Israeli Defense Forces acknowledge they can't beat Hamas. Hamas is an ideology. You can't defeat it. They can't defeat Hezbollah. Not only is it an ideology, but it's also backed by a military that in many ways is much more professional and much more prepared for the future conflict than the Israeli Defense Force is. So Biden's in an extraordinarily difficult situation right now, because if he does what's right and doesn't back Israel, he could lose part of the Israeli vote, or the pro-Israeli vote, which will accrue to Trump at a time when, the elections are already very close. The last thing Biden wants to do is give Trump even more advantage. So he wants to hold on to the pro-Israeli constituency in America. But to do that, you can't stand up to Netanyahu. What he really needs is is a way to get Netanyahu out of the picture so that more rational players come in, so that Biden can enact more rational policy without paying the political price here at home. But so long as Netanyahu is prime minister, genocide in Gaza becomes the only policy the United States can support, and expanding the conflict and against Hezbollah likewise is a policy position the United States has no choice but to support, or else Biden loses the election.
But it seems that they're serious, that they want to attack Hezbollah. If they go there, if they start fighting with Hezbollah and the United States just perceive that they're losing, what would be the reaction on the part of the United States?
What can the United States do? There's nothing the United States can do. What, we're going to bomb Hezbollah? How's that working with the Houthi? American bombs, American fighters. We're the best in the world. We can impose our will on enemy. Can't oppose against the Houthi. They wear damn sandals and they're kicking our ass. All right. The Houthi have defeated the United States Navy. We sent one carrier battle group in, couldn't do anything. We're sending another one. It won't do anything either. So what are we going to do against Hezbollah, which is a hardcore trained group of professional fighters? Not a damn thing. There's nothing we can do. What we can do is lose ships, because the Houthi have old school missiles, old school capabilities. Hezbollah has cutting edge. And, there's that old saying, fool around, find out. They don't say fool, but I'm respecting your audience by not using a bad word. But mess around and find out. If America messes around against Hezbollah, they're going to find out. And you're going to find out a hard lesson. And the United States Navy knows this. We know this. We know that it's an impossible battle. But what we have to do is be seen as supporting Israel. One of the things that we're hoping would happen is that by saying we would support Israel against Hezbollah, is that Israel would say, well, then there's no need for us to go to war against Hezbollah because Hezbollah can be contained. But what Hezbollah has shown is that it can do anything it wants to do against Israel. That this war of attrition, this war of escalation is being managed by Hezbollah far more effectively than it's being managed by Israel. Israel's suffering horrific losses in terms of manpower, equipment, etc. The defense barrier that they've been building for decades, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, is being dismantled and can't be replaced. This is a humiliation for Israel, and this is why Israel politically has to be seen as doing something in response to this, because they can't continue this war of attrition, this escalation, because Hezbollah is in charge. Hezbollah is dictating the outcome on the battlefield. Israel's only hope from their perspective is to go in with overwhelming force to finally defeat Hezbollah. But Hezbollah has been preparing for that for years. Israel will not succeed. Hezbollah has a counter. The United States was hoping to tell the Israelis, don't worry, America's got your back. You don't need to go all the way in. But now Israel says, we're going in anyways. We want you with us. It's a trap, a political trap. Netanyahu knows America better than apparently Biden knows America. And now the United States is in a trap because we promised to support. Now, if Israel goes in and we don't support, we're seen as betraying Israel. It's a horrible situation. Netanyahu's the problem. Frankly speaking, the best thing the United States could do is take him out himself. Literally at this point in time, just tell the Israelis, we no longer recognize him as your leader. We're not going to do business with him. We want him gone. Finish him. Get rid of him. We want somebody else. We can't do business with him. We'll close down the embassy. We'll close all support. But Israel, ruled by Netanyahu, he'd be gone that quick. That'd be the end of Netanyahu. But if we don't do that, Netanyahu has openly bragged about how he can manipulate the United States, etc. Openly bragged about how he bought Congress. Netanyahu will just play America better than Biden can play America. And in the end, it'll cost Israel everything, and it'll be humiliating for the United States.
When it comes to the conflict in Gaza, Scott, if Trump wins, he was talking about Israel, the situation and the situation in Gaza. He said to them, it was a Israeli media, he was telling them that you're losing each and every country in the world. That's why you have to stop doing this. But we have been hearing the same thing before Donald Trump getting elected. And he was talking about Syria and why we are in Syria. We have to take out our troops. We have to do this. We have to do that. We didn't see anything coming out of those policies. And we had the same policy. Bernie Sanders was talking about these things, and he changed a lot. Each and everything that he was talking about just changed. But when it comes to Trump, that is so important right now, he has a very good chance of winning this election in 2024. How do you see his policy in Gaza if he wins? Is he going to get along with Netanyahu? We know that there are some sort of disagreements between Netanyahu and Donald Trump, especially when he was leaving the office and he had some sort of problems with Netanyahu.
America's not a dictatorship yet. When Biden ran for election last time, 2020, he promised that he would change America's nuclear posture. He said that he wants it to be a posture that's premised on the notion that we will only use nuclear weapons if we're attacked by nuclear weapons. He promised it. He said that the current policy of preemptive nuclear force in a non-nuclear environment is grossly irresponsible. And he was right, but he didn't change it. Instead, he put forward a new nuclear posture of the United States that cemented in preemption and even some cases strengthened it. He was his representative, senior arms control official in the State Department, speaking at a reunion of intermediate nuclear forces treaty inspectors and negotiators that I participated in, was asked why this didn't happen. The answer was the interagency isn't ready for it. Now, what is the interagency? When I was in government, the interagency was a process used by the National Security Advisor and the National Security Council to coordinate policy directed by the executive amongst the various departments and agencies. And they would send representatives in and they would coordinate amongst one another. That's legitimate. That's how government's supposed to work. But now it's morphed into something called the interagency. What is the interagency? Did you vote for it? I didn't vote for it. No American voted for it. Nobody knows what it is exactly. It's just there. It has many names. We call it the establishment. We can call it the swamp. We can call it the deep state. But it's there, this blob of unelected civil servants and military professionals that are running America and making policy for America. They're connected with the media. They're connected with academia. Take a look at Georgetown University, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, the feeders of people into this system, and how the system has taken over those institutions so that critical thinking is no longer tolerated. You have to buy into the templated model of behavior as a student, graduate, and then you are plugged into the interagency, into the establishment. Donald Trump may very well win the presidency. Who does he have to fall back on? Was Mike Pompeo anything other than the interagency, the establishment? Was John Bolton anything other than Donald Trump doesn't have the Donald Trump Academy of civil servants to say, okay, I'm going to pick these people. He's going to have to pick people that come from the establishment. And so the establishment will own him from day one. Now, he has claimed that he's going to come in and fire everybody in the establishment that disagrees with him and replace them with people that he handpicked. But where are they coming from? Where are the people he will handpick come from? They're just a different flavor of the establishment. There's no new thinkers out there. There's no critical thinkers out there. All the critical thinkers have been starved out, strangled, killed, wiped out. When I say killed, figuratively killed. But anybody who's in a position to influence policy today has been consumed by the establishment. They belong to the establishment. So Donald Trump is higher than a kite to think that he's going to come in, snap his fingers, and make things happen. That's why nothing happened under his old administration, because he snapped his fingers and they went, nope. You remember when he ordered all troops out of Syria? They didn't leave. They increased. Why? They lied to him. They just played games. They shuffled people around. They're the establishment. You know, it's a British comedy series. I think it's a Minister, or Yes Minister, or something of that nature. Very funny comedy series. But the whole notion of it begins with an election and a new minister is appointed, and he comes in and he has to deal with the permanent civil service. And you just see how he wants to do things, and the civil service ensures that it never gets done. Why? Because they don't want change, because they have the system they're happy with. Ministers come and go, but the blob stays the same. That's the same thing in America. It doesn't matter who the president is. Vladimir Putin hinted at it when he talked about, presidents can promise the world, but as soon as they become president, men in dark suits and dark ties and briefcases come down and sit down and talk to them. And suddenly they're told there's the way that it's going to be done. And your way isn't that way. So that's the reality. Donald Trump, the one time he tried to deviate significantly from the will of the establishment was on North Korea. And he got stabbed in the back by his Secretary of State and his National Security Advisor. Because the establishment's not looking for new policy, innovative policy, successful policy. The establishment's looking for policy that sustains the system that's been in place to enrich them, politically sustain them, and economically enrich them. And that's what Donald Trump is going to run into. That's the danger of being attracted to Trump. Because one, he's a fundamentally flawed politician, fundamentally flawed. He doesn't have good ideas. He has dangerous ideas. People think they're good ideas because they're ideas that are different from Biden, and they hate Biden right now. They were different from Hillary, and they hated Hillary. But they're not good ideas. He doesn't have good ideas on arms control. He's going to take us to World War III. He doesn't have good ideas on how to deal with Korea anymore. Fire and fury might be his go-to action. But his ideas are going to come in and be articulated to an establishment that just doesn't want to hear them and isn't prepared to do anything about them, and is going to let them drown, as they will drown. He only has 4 years. He's going to be a lame duck the moment he's elected. So that's the reality. That's the harsh reality. Nobody wants to talk about it. All the Trump supporters are going to hate me forever for what I just said, but it's the reality of it. How's he going to drain the swamp? He can't, because he doesn't have an instruction manual. The instruction manual he does have is written by the swamp, and it leads you down artificial paths. But at the end of the day, you get tied up, confused, and nobody's there to support you. Who is going to be Donald Trump's Secretary of State? I'd like him to articulate that right now. And even if he picks somebody like he did last time with Rex Tillerson, how is the State Department going to support an outsider like that? Because the State Department is the blob. Are you going to fire everybody in the State Department, which he claims he might want to do? Who are you going to replace them with? People who graduated from Donald Trump University? No. So, people just have to start thinking about what they're asking. To make political change in America, you can't just change the president. You have to change Congress. You have to change the way we do business. You have to take money out of politics. There has to be fundamental changes from the ground up. But the idea that we can take this corrupt edifice that's called the American political triangle, and simply by lopping off the top and putting something different, we change anything. We change nothing. Change nothing whatsoever.
Just to wrap up this session, Scott, when you look at the bigger picture of the Middle East before the conflict started in Gaza and right now, how do you find it right now?
Well, what's interesting is under Trump, they implemented something called the Abrams Accords. The Abrams Accords was basically the notion that the United States could broker diplomatic reconciliation between Israel and various Arab nations to get the recognition of Israel and the integration of Israel into an overall scheme that promoted American hegemony, American control of the region. And it looked like things were moving that direction. Indeed, there was talk, up until the end about normalization of Israel and Saudi Arabia was an advanced state of talk when October 7th happened. But the reality is, go back in time. Go back to when the moment when Saudi Arabia started selling more oil to China than the United States. And then read the news report, read the analysis and what that meant. That meant that Saudi Arabia was strategically committed on a path that its inevitable outcome would be a withdrawal from the petrodollar. Because once you start dealing with China, and China's not going to buy into perpetuating the petrodollar, means Saudi Arabia is going to have to accept currency other than the dollar. And when China becomes the major consumer, you're going to. So what happened here? China making this decision didn't happen in a vacuum. It's been happening for some time now. Turkey's been trying to be a member of the EU forever, and the EU has rejected Turkey forever. Turkey's been in violent opposition to many EU policies. And I say violent, take a look at what they're doing in northern Syria. Take a look at what they're doing in Libya. Remember that the Turkish Navy almost went to war against the French Navy a while back, escorting weapons supplies into Libya. Turkey is in fundamental disagreement with Greece, a European nation, fellow member of NATO. So when Turkey finally wakes up and says, we'd like to be invited to BRICS and look that way, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because the EU has never welcomed Turkey into it. Europe has never welcomed Turkey into it. And BRICS is a forum that addresses the Turkish approach, which is a multipolar approach that has Turkey as an equal. Turkey wants to be seen as an equal. Europe wants Turkey to be this subordinated power, not an equal, but sort of a neo-colonial relationship. BRICS offers something different. That decision didn't happen in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. History is involved in everything. And you take a look at all the decisions being made now. What's happened is that because of the incompetence of the United States, because of the pressure cooker of Gaza, that many decisions that were inevitable have been accelerated by the pressures of the present time. But these decisions, these outcomes that we're seeing were outcomes that were inevitable. There's very few outcomes here that weren't predictable in the past, even Israel's demise. People have been rightfully saying that Israel as an entity is an unsustainable entity, that the Zionist experiment is not one that can last a long time. What we're seeing now is because of the conflict that inevitable outcome is being accelerated, but it's not an outcome that was solely dictated by the present day situation. It was an outcome that was dictated by the history of the region, the history of the world.
Borders with Lebanon that is terrifying for the Israelis. What about we show even further weakness and we increase the appetite of Hezbollah crossing the borders? What about the other aspects of the resistance saying, well, perhaps it's a time to direct a strong hit against the Israelis and their allies in the region? What's going to happen to the American bases in Iraq? Are they going to be soft on them? Is the Iraqi resistance going to be soft? I don't think so. What's going to happen to the presence of the American occupying the northeast of Syria? Is that going to get away with it depending on the intensity of the battle in Lebanon in case of war?
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Kalik, and this is Dispatches. After 8 months of live stream genocide in Gaza, Israel has still yet to achieve its military objectives. It hasn't destroyed Hamas. It hasn't released all its hostages, aside from a handful that it returned through a horrific massacre of hundreds of Palestinians. And its leadership looks increasingly irrational and desperate as it seeks to escalate on all fronts, eyeing Lebanon next. But if the Israelis can't defeat the Qassam brigades who are operating under the harshest conditions from inside a besieged death camp, how do they think they can even begin to properly face the much larger and far more powerful Hezbollah without severe consequences? US officials have tried to diplomatically avert an all-out war on Lebanon because even they recognize Israel can't win, and it would potentially draw in Iran and the US. But rationality isn't Israel's strong suit. Its sponsors have allowed it to go as far as it wants with zero red lines, meaning Israeli delusions of grandeur and messianic genocidal ambitions for territorial expansion rule the day. So, what would a big war between Israel and Hezbollah look like in the Levant and across the region? What are the latest military developments from Gaza to Lebanon? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by veteran war correspondent and analyst Elijah Magnier. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can always donate below on YouTube. Elijah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you back on. And the last time I had you on was sometime in the beginning of the year. It was either January or February. We talked about military developments across the various fronts with regard to Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. We focused a bit on Lebanon. We talked about Iran. We talked about Yemen, Iraq. So I want to cover some of those same bases today with a bit of a more focus on what everybody seems to be most concerned about right now, which is a potential all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. But before we get to that, I thought it would be good to maybe start with an update, if you will, on, what are your thoughts on the sort of military situation in Gaza, right? We're 8 months into this horrific live streamed slaughter that Israel's been carrying out. Israel went in saying that their intention, their goal was to eradicate Hamas. That has not happened. There are still ongoing battles. Israel has managed to kill tens of thousands of civilians in the process. They haven't gotten all their hostages back because they refused to abide by any sort of ceasefire that would do that. So yeah, can you kind of paint us a picture of the current situation, militarily speaking, in Gaza? Is Israel any closer to achieving its goals? Do you think this will end anytime soon? And how long do you think Hamas can last? I know that's a lot in there, but yeah, feel free to take that where you'd like.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Even if it looks like outside the topic, I would like to start with something extremely significant, which is what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres enlisted Israel with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram as a terrorist entity. This is now we can comfortably say that Israel and terrorism are the same thing, according to the United Nations. That is a decision of the Secretary General, and this is why it is very significant. Having said that, the reason why Antonio Guterres did that is because the Israelis have failed to achieve any of the stated objective militarily. Nevertheless, they have managed to kill 16,500 children of Gaza, and they've killed around 38,000 as a total, of which 70% are civilians, children, women, elderly, and others. And this is the only thing they have achieved. The Israeli forces have achieved, apart from the destruction of the Gaza infrastructure and homes. So more than 500,000 of the Palestinian homes have been destroyed, hospitals, universities, schools, everything. From the military approach, that is far from being an achievement, because we have seen how the Israelis went to the north and then they said, mission accomplished, we finished the job. They went to the south, they said exactly the same, and then went to Rafah. But then they started again in the north, and then they do some sort of on and off attacks in the south. We're talking about Beit Hanun, Hamad, and all that area. And then the operation in Rafah continued thanks to the permission given by Egypt, because the Israelis have deployed a full division in Rafah. They have deployed mechanic divisions. They have deployed jets and helicopters, and all that is violating 1978 peace agreement, that is Camp David Accord, and the 2005 additional protocol. And because of that, the Israelis are deployed on the Philadelphia corridor, the 14 kilometers along the Egyptian borders. They managed to kill 2 Egyptian soldiers, but Egypt closed both eyes on what the Israelis have done. But their biggest failure is inside Rafah, and in particular, the area that is less inhabited. And this is where the Israelis are receiving one hit after another. We have heard how the Israelis on daily basis are announcing between 8 to 11 officers and soldiers killed, and a total between 16 to 32 casualties per day in Rafah. That is significant because it shows how the organization of the Palestinian resistance is ongoing while the battle is happening. We have seen how the Palestinian resistance is still bombing the Gaza envelope from the north, where the Israelis were operating and then pulled out, from the south, and even from Rafah, they bombed the eastern side of the Gaza envelope settlements, and they have managed to cause really some damage to the Israelis, forcing them to go to shelters. So that is significant because the Palestinian resistance is always sending messages that we are still healthy, powerful, and we have not been defeated, with their actions, not with their words. And the Israelis are coming to a conclusion where they have to withdraw from Rafah in the next couple of weeks, which means the war is stagnating without achieving any purpose, and it's time to sit with Hamas that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, promised to destroy, with the recommendation of the Americans to go and sit with Hamas, that even the Americans said they need to be finished off. So we are back to square one, of course, with many civilians killed, destruction of Gaza, but again, the Palestinian resistance has shown the fragility of the Israeli army that used to be known as the strongest, one of the strongest in the world, and the best equipped militarily.
Yeah, that's all very important to understand, especially in terms of what the Israelis are now saying. I mean, there's always so much bluster from Israeli officials, but across the political spectrum, you hear increasing rhetoric about, we need to destroy Lebanon, we need to turn our attention to what's happening in the north. Even Benny Gantz, who's supposed to be this like liberal figure in Israel that the Biden administration, prefers to the Likud party and people like Benjamin Netanyahu. Even he recently said Lebanon must burn. And this is, of course, me and you are talking as we're speaking. Amos Hochstein, the envoy appointed by President Joe Biden, is visiting Lebanon right now, where I am, speaking to Lebanese officials after a visit to Israel, trying to essentially stave off an all-out war, because even the Americans don't think the Israelis would be able to achieve their military objectives in Lebanon let alone, the fact that they haven't been able to do so in Gaza. Now, you recently wrote a piece, Elijah, at your website. It's called, "Is There Any Potential Israeli War on Lebanon? Scenarios and Implications." And this is such an important piece. And I want to go into some of the various topics you highlight. Now, I want to make it clear, though, the U.S. does seem to, in fact, not want a war, an all-out war with Lebanon. They're trying to prevent it. But we've also seen that the U.S. still lets Israel make its own decisions for the most part. So it's still unclear, like, what would actually happen if Israel would be reckless enough to do this. I do want to point out, before we get into your piece, there was a recent piece by Ali Hesham, the Al Jazeera English reporter, in foreign policy. And I just want to quote something he says that stood out to me. He said, "An official in Iran's Quds Force overseeing Hezbollah and other Iranian-linked factions in the Middle East told Foreign Policy that Hezbollah now possesses more than 1 million rockets of various types, including precision-guided missiles and modified Katyusha rockets for increased accuracy, as well as anti-tank missiles." And that's, of course, in addition to all the suicide drones and other drones that are equipped with many different kinds of missiles that enable air-launched attacks from inside, from inside Israeli territory. A lot of Iranian missiles equipped with cameras. A lot of Israeli missiles that have been taken from Lebanon and recreated and made into working missiles for Hezbollah. I mean, you and I talked a bit about these kinds of things the last time I had you on, but Hezbollah's arsenal is massive. So I want to move to your piece now. You write, and I'm quoting you, "The primary Israeli military concern is that the enormous damage that Hezbollah could inflict on the domestic front, meaning the Israeli economy, industry, and the future fragile security of Israel." So let's start there. Let's say a war were to break out. I'm sure this is something that Israelis are playing out, Hezbollah is playing out, American officials are playing out. If an all-out war were to break out, what is this damage that you're referring to that Hezbollah has the potential to inflict on Israel?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So let's start with what the Israeli military spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said. He said that Hezbollah has fired more than 5,000 rockets, missiles, and drones against Israeli barracks along the south of Lebanon borders. Normally, Israel doesn't need a reason to start a war, but Israel had 5,000 reasons to start a war with Lebanon, and it didn't. First of all, the merit goes to the Palestinian resistance, who exposed the fragility of the Israeli army, incapable within 364 square kilometers to defeat a resistance that is living in the open concentration camp, where modern weapons are extremely difficult to bring in, and they rely first on the soul of a fighter, second on the will to defeat the enemy, third on their attachment to their ancestors' land, and fourth on the weapon that they manufacture locally, even if these weapons are primitive, but they are quite efficient against an enemy when the fighter is really determined to confront another that doesn't own the land and is afraid of going and needs to destroy everything before going in. So that was a very big lesson for the axis of the resistance, including Hezbollah, that took the initiative for the first time in the history of Israel since 1948 to take the initiative and attack Israel and start the war on the 8th of October, and then increase in intensity, challenging, humiliating the Israelis. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, more than 55 times came to the border with Lebanon and threatened to destroy and annihilate Lebanon. Ben Gvir, the security minister, said he will burn Lebanon, and every now and then there are between 15 to 21 firefighter Israeli teams trying to control the fire that is in Israel along the borders due to the Hezbollah rockets and drones and missiles. So we have seen all empty rhetoric, and what you rightly said about Amos Hochstein, the US envoy, who came to Lebanon to try and save Israel. This is exactly what the Americans are trying to do, trying to spare Israel further humiliation in Gaza and major humiliation in Lebanon. So what is the scenario, the worst case scenario that Israel can have? By confronting Lebanon, because the resistance is part of the country, part of Lebanon, and it is part of the ministerial communique that recognizes the right of the resistance, the people in the army, to defend the country. Now, first of all, the infantry. It is impossible for such an infantry that we have seen its performance in Gaza to go to a much more equipped, better experienced, and highly motivated special forces, Hezbollah, to be confronted with. On the south of Lebanon today, there is a very small number of Hezbollah who are operating today, because Hezbollah doesn't need a large number, first, to reduce the casualties. Second, there is no need with what Hezbollah is launching between 100 to 300 rockets and artillery, because Hezbollah has the audacity to use even Howitzer 152 millimeter on the borders, exposing that to all the 70, 80 Israeli drones and fire artillery shells on the Israelis. Apart from what you rightly mentioned, the drones, the televised drone with television showing the word where it's a target, but not only that, drones acting as reconnaissance, filming how other drones are reaching their objective and attacking it. We've seen that only in the West, only with the Israelis and the Americans, and now we are seeing it in Hezbollah, that is showing to the Israelis their modern capability. Now, the infantry cannot go in. First, because Hezbollah has more powerful laser anti-tank missiles that Hezbollah has fired more than 1,500 so far, only of these laser guided, which is much more than what France's arsenal is of laser guided missiles, which means that Hezbollah has 10 times more and is still bringing in all the ammunition needed as long as Hezbollah is using it. Secondly, the tanks cannot go in because we've seen how the mechanic units have failed in confronting the RPG Yasin Palestinian manufactured RPGs, and how this is causing damage to the Israeli mechanic units. Thirdly, the Navy is out of the equation since 2006, when Hezbollah had primitive surface-to-surface missile. We're talking about the Chinese C-802 missile that hit the Hanit SAR-5 and brought the entire Navy out of the equation. Today, Hezbollah has much more modern surface-to-surface missile. Now, the only way to confront Hezbollah is with the Air Force. And even that, we've seen Hezbollah downing 5 Hermes 450 and 900 and other 2 Skylark drones. And the Sayad 2C that the anti-air missile Hezbollah has used is faster than the F-16, but the F-16 has much more maneuver, but not on a low altitude.
I appreciate it.
So it can bring down the Israeli jets. Also, what about the all the Israeli oil and gas rigs? What about Haifa and Ashdod? What about the Mediterranean? Just crippling entirely the Israeli economy. What about all the barracks that are along the borders? But not only that, what the Israelis did, thinking they are clever and Hezbollah's capability is limited, they have improvised 800 meters to 1,000 meters away from the original barracks, a newly improvised position where they gather the forces to tell Hezbollah, okay, well, you have collected information about us. You know where is our location. We have a new one that you don't know. This is exactly what Hezbollah is targeting. It's targeting the newly improvised position. It's targeting the position of the Israeli intelligence unit in civilian residence that were improvised in many settlements along the borders. So it's showing the update information that Hezbollah has. And the last point, and I allow you to speak, is what about if Israel wants to bomb until south of the Litani River? So we're talking about at least 200,000 of internally displaced Israeli people that are going to move out because Hezbollah will target until Nahariya. What about north of the Litani River? Then Hezbollah will extend to Haifa, and we're talking about 1 million Israeli refugees. What about Beirut? And then we're talking about Tel Aviv. What about the Bekaa Valley, including Beirut? Then we're talking about beyond Tel Aviv. Then how many millions will go to the shelters? We've seen a couple of weeks ago, Hezbollah targeting just close to Haifa, and we've seen between 200,000 and 1 million refugees in one day, when everybody started in Israel screaming, either you get rid of Hezbollah and that is not available, or we stop this war because we can't afford it. Now, the Major General Ishaq Brick, the Israeli Major General, said that Netanyahu is exposing Israel to a Holocaust in case of a war with Lebanon that will lead to the collapse of Israel. Other people talking about, we will wake up one day and we will have something similar to the explosion of an atomic bomb in the center of Israel, not because Hezbollah has an atomic bomb, but because it will bring hundreds of thousands of people in shelters, and everything on the surface will be destroyed if Israel destroys and start targeting civilians and infrastructure in Lebanon. Because of that, and because of fragility of the Israeli army, no reservist, no extra battalion that the army needs, no appetite for the Americans to be engaged in a wider war, Israel is not going to go and wage a war on Lebanon.
And I want to also ask you about a particular group that the Israelis have been so focused on. I mean, they talk about it like it's the thing they fear the most in the war. This is in the world. This is the Redwan forces, which are, I believe, a few units within Hezbollah. You can actually explain that. Can you tell our audience who are the Redwan forces and what would their role be in an Israeli attack on Lebanon? That even if it doesn't happen, this is something that the Israelis play out when they have to think about whether they're going to do this or not.
First of all, Hezbollah created what is called the intervention force. And that was when Haji Imad Mogni was around, and he was determined to create a force that is extremely well-trained, exposed to all kinds of weapons in all weathers, and would go to a specific special training that exceeds the training of the Seas or the Ranger even. The training is beyond 1.5 years. No one above the 35 years old is allowed to continue, and they would be moved to other units. And they have extended experience in the war in Syria, fighting on 80,000 square kilometers, when Lebanon, we're talking about only 6,000 square kilometers, the area that is not under the control of the Shia populated people. But if we're talking about the south of Lebanon, where Israel needs or may think about attacking, we're talking about between 4,000 to 5,000 square kilometers, including the Bekaa Valley. So we're talking about a minute area where the Redwan forces that were called Redwan because of Imad Mogni is called Haj Redwan, and they would operate in 4,500 square kilometers when these Ridwan forces operated in 80,000 square kilometers in Syria and in much bigger surface in Iraq. In different circumstances, they fought in the desert, they fought in against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, in urban warfare, in fought along the Russian and the Syrian army. They were everywhere and they experienced everything. And they go to a regular training on daily basis, on monthly basis, and on yearly basis, updated on the latest technology. These are the people that the Israelis are going to fight one day. I hope not for the Israelis. So what's going to happen is that these forces, the number of these forces has increased, that between 7,000 to 10,000, and they were deployed in the south of Lebanon before the war. When the war started, the number of the deployment of this force was extremely reduced to reduce the casualties, because there is no need for such a number on the borders, and because Hezbollah was adapting to artificial intelligence that Israel is using, recognizing the presence of the fighters. They follow them at home, they follow them in previous offices and places. They have managed through artificial intelligence draw a map before the war on the places they frequent. But the Israelis are not behaving with Hezbollah as they are behaving with the Palestinians. With the Palestinians, there is a big margin of error of artificial intelligence, and because the Israelis feel in a much more powerful position, they are taking on board all the objectives presented by the artificial intelligence, and this is why they are inflicting very heavy civilian casualties over the Palestinians. They don't dare to do the same in Lebanon, but then because they will be confronted with an equal attack on the civilians if Israel does the same. So the Israelis have to be extremely careful in selecting the target. The Ridwan force is today on the side, most of it, but only a small part of it, that is related to the anti-air missiles, to the anti-tank missiles and laser-guided missiles, to the artillery, and to the drones that they have experienced and mastered. And we've seen that in their videos, in attack and in maneuvering, visible or behind hills or behind concrete or hidden in different parts that the Israelis try to camouflage. And this is the unit that Israel is afraid of confronting. And this is the unit that is preventing the Israelis from thinking about going into Lebanon or occupying any main hills, because Hezbollah also think what Israel can be capable of doing and what is the worst case scenario. And they discover, according to what I come across with, that it is possible for the Israeli to come and occupy few hills, but then it is impossible for the Israeli to spend even the night there, because the function of the Ridwan Special Forces is to make sure that the Israeli will not be able to leave. Where do they put their foot in the south of Lebanon beyond the borders? So what we have today is we have a buffer zone for the first time that was created inside, beyond the Lebanese borders, where no Israeli can live, and everybody has abandoned it. For the first time, Israel not only is attacked on the 8th of October, is forced to humiliation, and there is a buffer zone that is created in the land that is under its occupation, and it is not taking the initiative to transport the battle into what's called the enemy territory.
And, real quick, since you mentioned the buffer zone, which we've heard a lot about, I want to actually show a map that the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is like a horrible Zionist think tank in Washington, D.C. Though I will credit them, they did create this interactive map that I'm showing on the screen right now of essentially they catalog the Israeli strikes on southern Lebanon and the Hezbollah strikes on northern Israel. And it's a really, really interesting map to look at, because what you see is, for those who are watching, all these little blue dots are the Israeli strikes since October 8th. Let me zoom in a little bit. This is the northern Israel border and the southern Lebanon border. And then all the yellow strikes are Hezbollah's strikes on northern Israel. So, I mean, it's not like there's the vast majority of them are not blue or yellow. It seems to be pretty even, because what you've had since October 8th is this tit for tat, obviously is, far more destructive than Hezbollah has. That said, this is the buffer zone you're talking about. It's created this buffer zone inside northern Israel, as well as you could say southern Lebanon, right? People from both of these sides of the border have essentially been displaced in significant numbers because of the back and forth. But I'm curious, Elijah, could you just elaborate a bit on the significance of this buffer zone in terms of what it's meant for Israel? Because this is the first time in history since the creation of this state that there has been a buffer zone inside of territory Israel controls.
The most significant first point, I would say, is how Hezbollah is conducting a war along 120 kilometers equally, engaging the Israelis on a large front. And that is not easy from the military point of view. To be able to open a front that is so wide, including the Golan Heights, that is a Syrian territory occupied by the Israelis, where there are several very important and significant Israeli military facilities that give it monitor Turkey, that area, and the whole of Syria. And for Hezbollah to send a message saying that we in static and others which improvisometers, classical army can maintain such an intensity as your map is showing for almost 9 months. That is very significant. Secondly, the quantity of weapons and ammunition. When Hezbollah is using so much ammunition along 120 kilometers, ready for a war that can last at least 1 year with Israel, and decide that it's important to inflict serious damage on the domestic front and maintain between 500 to 1,500 rocket missiles per day, we're talking about an arsenal that is very, very large, with the possibility that maybe Israel will be able, with its air force, to close the supply line. Thirdly, it indicates and reinforces the point that Hezbollah is manufacturing weapons domestically, apart from modifying these weapons to fit its war. And that will help Hezbollah to sustain the battle. Fourth, what we are seeing today above the ground, I think it is very little in comparison of the cities under the ground. We're not talking about tunnels. We're talking about cities. And the importance of this city or cities in the south of Lebanon has a purpose. To fight against artificial intelligence, fighters need to go under the ground and not remain above the ground, because artificial intelligence is very developed and can monitor something that the naked eye cannot see. This is why it is important to make sure that there is no difference of the topography when fighting to go to one place and then to another. The change, the burning of the leaves due to the fire when a laser-guided missile is fired, or artillery or a rocket, because traces will always be left behind. This is why it is important to make sure that the fighters can live under the ground as they live above the ground, and even better. The communication also, it's important, because when fighters go to the south of Lebanon, sometimes for 10 to 15 days, they cannot be replaced. So they have to be able to sustain a long period of time fighting every day against an enemy without being replaced. Another point is the logistic supply. So they have to have enough ammunition and food and water to sustain their presence and continue the battle. So they are completely autonomous. This is not, a classical army cannot do that. A non-state actor cannot do that. And this is why Hezbollah is called a highly organized, irregular non-state actor, because it has managed to combine both the classical and the guerrilla warfare using modern technology, but everything that a special force need, which is completely different from classical army, where special forces can live in all conditions and they have the endurance to sustain a long life and a long resilience and fighting as long as it takes. So what we see on the map, we see something that, as you have shown the people who are watching this video, this is exactly what the Israelis are looking at in their operational room. And they are thinking, how the hell we can attack an organized non-state actor that can spread everywhere? Because at certain point in the past, Hezbollah used to think, well, maybe the Israelis can come from the Syrian axis. That is the most fragile. And then the Syrian axis is not active yet, because this is where Hezbollah is ready for them on the Syrian soil. And this is something that President Bashar al-Assad fully gave his consensus in case Israel attacks. So for that, Syria is not going to be on the side, but it will be more engaged than Lebanon in case of an all-out war. But there's another point that is important as you are in Lebanon for the Lebanese to hear. Of course, Hezbollah doesn't need men because it has tens of thousands of well-trained men to fight. Nevertheless, Hezbollah doesn't mind to have specialized units that come from the friend and the members of the axis of the resistance. These people can come to Lebanon and can support, because Hezbollah needs to sustain on daily basis, as I said, between 500 to 1,500. The figures of 4,000 to 5,000 are a bit...
You're talking about missiles.
Sorry?
You're talking about missiles? The number you're putting out? But you said
Yes.
it's 500 to 1,500. You're talking about like daily missile attacks.
Daily. Yeah, daily.
In an all-out war. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, rocket, missiles, and drones, and artillery. For
And
them,
when you mentioned 4,000, well, you're just real quick to specify for people who are listening and watching, when you say 4,000, 5,000, that's the estimate of daily attacks that the Israelis say Hezbollah is capable of firing. But please go ahead.
Yeah, it's not realistic, because if we divide that, if we multiply that by 365 days, we have over 1 million, and this is not something that is logical from the military point of view, because for Hezbollah, as Hezbollah did in 2006, we understood that it is extremely important to show to the Israelis a capability of launch on daily basis, non-stop, without any break. And that is something that puts a lot of pressure, not only on the military, psychologically, militarily, and on the domestic front, that they have to live for 365 days in their shelters all the time. And this is why 400 to 500 rockets and missiles, I think, are enough to keep all of Israel in the shelter for a year. Can they live that? But we're not talking about easy missiles, because if the Israeli want to advance in the Lebanese territory, then this is something that is going to be detrimental for Israel. I will explain why. Because the further Hezbollah needs to fire its missiles, the heavier the missile is going to be. So we start talking about at least 400 kilograms of explosive, with missile carrying heavy explosive to hit the Israelis, and we're talking about between 400 or 350 to 2,100 kilograms of explosive. So the further the Israelis cross the border, the heavier they will have to endure on the domestic front and on the barracks. So this is not in their advantage. So I was saying that sustaining the 500 to 1,500 missiles, rocket, and drone per day is something that Hezbollah would easily do to show the Israelis the capability. But then who is going to fire that every day non-stop? This is where the allies come into action, specialized allies. But my question is, what's going to happen to these allies at the end of the war? Are they going to leave? I don't think so. Because in this case, they will remain in Lebanon and they will continue supporting the Hezbollah for a longer war. But then the further the Israelis want to push the Hezbollah and its society away from the south and the Bekaa Valley, these people need to go somewhere. They're not going to go to Syria. They're going to go inland, and they're going to go into the Lebanese territory. Are the US allies thinking about this possibility? What's going to happen to the allies of the US? Are the Israelis thinking about their potential allies in Lebanon? What's going to happen to them when this society needs to move from one area to another? So all these questions, I think the Israelis and the Americans need to think about very carefully, how they're going to change the geography of Lebanon, but the Shia are not going to go anywhere. They're going to stay in Lebanon, but they have to stay somewhere, and in particular in areas where a society is supportive of Israel, because there will not be a room for them.
So I also just want to point out, and this is something you mentioned in your piece, when we talk about the destructive capacity that Hezbollah has to inflict on Israel, it's not also, of course, to deny what they can do to Lebanon. We know they can destroy Lebanon. There's no question with their air superiority, but Hezbollah has also shown that it does have surface-to-air missiles that have been able to bring down Israeli drones. That could potentially be used against Israeli fighter jets, and then you could lead to the capture of pilots. I mean, there's so many situations that are so damaging for the Israelis that could come out of a war on Lebanon, even if they were to destroy Lebanon. And a point you make too that I just want to emphasize is that Hezbollah has the capacity to endure, and Lebanon actually has the capacity to endure more than Israel can. Hezbollah can handle casualties in a way that Israel cannot. It can deal with the financial damage. It's already under extreme sanction. Lebanon's already in economic collapse. These are not things that the Israelis are used to, that then they would have to endure, like the economic consequences of a broader war would be quite devastating for Israel as well, something that Lebanon's already used to dealing with. So in many cases, the Israelis just aren't, and you mentioned also the attachment to the land. I mean, there's so many reasons why the Israelis are not prepared and will never be prepared for a big war with Hezbollah. But then there's also the addition of, and you kind of alluded to this when you're talking about allies, and this is something the Americans have repeatedly warned about when they're going to tell the Israelis, don't go to all-out war with Lebanon, don't go to all-out war with Lebanon, is the fear that it would draw in Iran. And so I'm just curious, because we haven't talked about that element. I wanted to just bring in the fact that just a couple months ago, the Iranians demonstrated their capability, at least some of their capability, when after Israel attacked their consulate in Damascus and killed several Iranian leaders, they responded with a very choreographed and, warned about missile launch. They launched 300 different kinds of missiles at the Israelis to demonstrate what they could do. The Israelis had a week of preparation, so several countries came in to help block any of these missiles from actually hitting Israel, which of course is what Iran was betting on, because they didn't want to provoke a bigger war. That said, are the Americans right? Do you think that if Israel did launch an all-out war on Lebanon, it would draw in the Iranians? And then ultimately what the Americans' big fear is that it would draw them in as well.
Well, it's really clever to mention the Iranian attack and if Iran is going to be involved or not, because
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.
Week. Is the State Department funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine? And is General Petraeus, I know you can't make this up, is General Petraeus celebrating them?
Well, General Petraeus, David Petraeus, is the latest to celebrate them after former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson hailed the Azov Battalion or Azov Regiment as heroes. At the Gray Zone, we republished a piece by Noir, which is a newsletter, on how the Stanford Extremism Project quietly removed the Azov Battalion from its list of right-wing extremist international groups just about a month before the State Department decided to greenlight U.S. weapons directly to the Azov Battalion, which is now the Azov Regiment because it's formally incorporated into the Ukrainian military. At the Gray Zone, we've been reporting on U.S. arms going to Azov for years and years. Going back to 2017, I think that was the first time we reported on them getting U.S. weapons. Now it's official. And just, for some context, this is an organization, a neo-Nazi militia that not only reveres Stepan Bandera, who oversaw the Lviv pogrom of 1941 through his Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, but also oversaw the slaughter of tens of thousands of ethnic Poles who were in the Ukrainian nationalist way because they were Galician. They're also led by someone named Andrei Beletsky, who now heads their civilian unit, the National Corps. He basically there's like an office divider between him and the Azov Regiment, authorized by the State Department. He declared in 2010 that the mission of Ukraine is to lead the white Christian race against the Semite-led Untermenschen. This is a neo-Nazi group supported by Tony Blinken,
fighting on behalf of the white race.
The man who raised him, Samuel Pisar, his father-in-law, was saved from a Nazi concentration camp by the Soviet Red Army, and his son is giving weapons to the grandsons of those who participated in the Holocaust of bullets.
I remember a picture of Blinken in a coffee shop somewhere, festooned with neo-Nazi memorabilia taken down before the Secretary of State entered. Am I thinking about the same people?
Yeah, this is a controversial story, but Blinken was supposedly at a cafe that was honoring the neo-Nazis who massacred ethnic Russians in Odessa who protested the Maidan coup. They massacred them in a union hall. But I'm not sure about the truth of that story. But we have just down the road from where I've lived in Washington, D.C., is Joint Base Andrews down in Prince George's County. And as Moss Robeson reported, and we republished his piece at the Gray Zone, that Joint Base Andrews recently hosted a charity golf tournament for wounded veterans that featured numerous neo-Nazi members of the Azov Battalion, and they were lauded there, celebrated by David Petraeus.
These are the guys with, if you saw them bare-chested or bare-armed, you'd see swastikas tattooed onto their bodies. Am I right?
And other various insignia inspired by the Waffen-SS.
What is with the same man who greeted Bibi Netanyahu on October 8th and said, "I come as a Jew," and he's funding Nazis?
Well, it's all a matter of enforcing the rules-based order, I guess. The Ukrainian army is is severely depleted right now. And the Azov regiment are some of the only fighters left who are ideologically motivated. Anyone can just go on Twitter X or any other social media site and see Ukrainian men fighting much harder to stay out of military police vans as they're being grabbed off the street in cities across Ukraine. They're fighting much harder to stay out of what they call the meat grinder than any other person in the Ukrainian military, except the Azov regiment, are fighting to defeat Russia. So basically, this is all the U.S. has left. These are the last shock troops, and they're the shock troops of empire. Say that they're the same as the Al-Qaeda allied forces in Syria that the U.S. was arming in the largest CIA semi-covert operation since Operation Cyclone back in the 1980s, which was then the largest CIA covert operation to arm the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that became a base of organization for the foundation of Al-Qaeda. So it doesn't matter. Like the U.S., especially when the Democratic Party's in control and they control the State Department, they preach progressive values, they preach social justice, but they don't care if Nazis or jihadists are fighting on the front lines. All they care about is weakening Russia.
Scamming black people. They preach social justice. That's what he's saying to black people. That's what he's saying. What I'm saying. They preach that bullshit to black people. They don't give a damn about arming the Nazis, having them the most powerful fighting force on the planet, and they tell you they fighting on behalf of the white race. Biggest scandal in American history. Congressional black coons. That's treason. Jim Crow Joe. He laughing. He laughing. That's the only thing that crazy senile fool really understand is what he doing with them Nazis. He love that type of shit.
Russia or China at their softest points.
And what is General Petraeus's involvement in all of this?
Well, Petraeus is a moron. I mean, that's the first thing we need to understand. He's someone who actually, if you're watching this right now, you can Google David Petraeus and moderate Al-Qaeda. He put forward a plan to arm moderate Al-Qaeda fighters in Syria during the Syrian dirty war. And it was reported by the Daily Beast, not exactly an anti-war publication, because it was such a clownish idea that there are actual moderate members of Al-Qaeda. Then Petraeus, he's a supporter of basically every war. He wants to have skin in the game. He likes being part of these ceremonies. He probably didn't even know that the Azov regiment has this history of being hardcore neo-Nazis who have carried out attacks inside Ukraine on Roma people, on gypsies, and so on. And this was an event planned by something called the Borderlands Foundation, which is part of the US-Ukraine lobby. And if you go on their site, there are they have an actual section where you can adopt a Nazi. Of course, it isn't called Adopt a Nazi, but you look at the kind of veterans that you can send support to. And these are people who, it says in their bio, are members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. That is the organization founded by Stepan Bandera to assist Nazi Germany in their occupation of Ukraine during World War II. And it's right there on the website.
Has the American State Department accused countries of genocide, which have been far less brutal and far less deadly than the IDF has been in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, let's look at the worst urban warfare that took place in Ukraine. It took place right at the beginning in Mariupol. Okay, throughout the entire time, there were civilian corridors in which people were allowed and encouraged to escape. And one of the biggest scandals for NATO and the Ukrainian military is that the majority of people who left through the civilian corridors in Mariupol went to the Russian side. Why? Because most of them spoke Russian and they had been under de facto occupation by the Azov battalion that fought to the bitter end in the Azovstal steel plant.
So they were
those people who went to Russia, a bunch of kids and stuff went too. They say Putin kidnapped those kids, and then they put a arrest warrant out for him for kidnapping kids. What a joke!
Ethnic Russians that the Ukrainian government was bombing and trying to kill.
Well, they had been suffering under them for years. There were protests that were violently repressed by the Ukrainian military in Azov starting in 2014. Many politicians in Mariupol were brutally assassinated, along with activists who didn't agree with the nationalist regime. But my point is, when large parts of Mariupol were destroyed, most of the population had already evacuated. You didn't see Russia deliberately targeting civilians in the way that Israel is doing as part of Israel's fundamental doctrine. And there's a Wall Street Journal article which helps elucidate Israel's fundamental doctrine in Gaza, which it came out about 5 days ago. And it's about how Israel is creating bubbles where civilians are allowed to remain safe, and everything around those bubbles will be bombed to smithereens. Everyone outside of them will essentially be targeted with assassination or risks being killed. And in order to get into those quote unquote bubbles, you have to pass through filtration points, which means all men are subject, and women as well, subject to interrogation and then being sent to Israel's brutal concentration torture camp in the Negev desert known as Sde Teman, where there are currently hundreds and hundreds of men from Gaza being brutally tortured. And this is already happening. The problem is that right now there are no bubbles of safety. Nowhere in Gaza is safe. So the U.S. has, not only the U.S., but supposedly international institutions like the International Olympic Committee forced Russia to hide its flag during competitions. Russian athletes could not compete as Russians. They've obviously faced other sanctions. Israel is going to face no such penalties in the upcoming Summer Olympics. Why? Why? Because the United States controls all these international institutions, and it's there to protect Israel as it carries out the most obvious case of genocide that we have seen, not just in my lifetime, but in the lifetime of anyone who has lived, who was born after World War II.
I want to get back to Ukraine for a minute, and I'm going to read a statement to you from the leader of a country that is in both the EU and NATO. The Brussels bureaucrats want this war. They see it as their own, and they want to defeat Russia. They keep sending the money of the European people to Ukraine. They have shot European companies in the foot with sanctions. They have driven up inflation. They have made making a living difficult for millions of European citizens. Viktor Orban, the adult in the room amongst the European leaders. I mean, I give him all the credit in the world for making a truthful statement like that, but he's not going to change the voters may change Macron's mind, but he's not going to.
Yeah, and Macron's getting stomped. Protests are rocking France. There were borderline riots in Lyon in protest against the incoming National Front majority. And a lot of that has to do with backlash against Macron's hardcore policy of, trying to edge out Germany as the leader of NATO, pushing for French troops in Ukraine after all the idiocy that we witnessed with France in West Africa, where it was winkled out by Burkina Faso and these other countries that it had plundered for years. What Orban is expressing is portrayed by the West, by the liberal West, as far-right authoritarian politics. But what Orban is really expressing is the economic necessity of average Europeans who have seen their standard of living plummet since sanctions were imposed on Russia. These are the boomerang sanctions that have completely failed and have ground German industry to the ground. Also, ironically, severely weakened Germany's green agenda. The Green Party had canceled prior to February 2022 all of the nuclear were planned to take all Germany's nuclear plants offline. Now they're going back online along with lots of coal plants because the oil isn't coming from Russia. The EU put out a snitch hotline on Twitter 2 days ago, asking citizens to snitch on anyone they knew who might be violating sanctions on Russia. And I want to put forward someone who is the husband of Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, one of the biggest hardliners against Russia, who was exposed across the board in European media for doing business with Russia. Why? Because Estonia is right next door. Everybody does business with Russia. They have historic relations, and their economy has suffered just as Ukraine's has by being forcibly severed by like an umbilical cord being cut from a country that is one of their largest export partners. So I mean, this just isn't going to work.
Before we talk in some detail about Israel, how much longer do you think Ukraine can last?
Well, it depends on what kind of Ukraine we're talking about here.
Well, a military resisting the Russians.
I think we're gonna see it continue, not just for as long as the Western elite leadership, the von der Leyens and the Newlands clique in Washington wants to see it continue because ideologically they're zealous about this war. They can't admit that they failed, and there are so many financial incentives for their backers. But we're also seeing Russia adopt a very slow strategy as they grind toward Chasiv Yar, which will open up this entire transport corridor to the west and then will lead to the more rapid defeat of the Ukrainian military. So I think, this will continue throughout the year.
The New York Times reported on its website just about 2 hours ago, this: Israeli generals low on munitions want a truce in Gaza.
Yeah, it's funny.
What does this tell you about Netanyahu
they losing.
not confronting reality and living in his own bizarro world?
Well, this is sort of an outgrowth or maybe a more comprehensive articulation of what we heard from the spokesman of the Israeli army, Daniel Hagari, earlier in June, when he said Hamas cannot be defeated. It's an idea. Now we're hearing from more sources who are speaking to Ronan Bergman, who is a New York Times security reporter, who's basically a conduit for the Israeli securitocratic elite, the officer corps. He's quoting a lot of people in the general staff here on background and off the record. And what they're saying is Netanyahu
is it credible what he's reporting, Max?
Well, yeah, it is definitely credible. And here's what's happening. Netanyahu is keeping them in this war for political reasons. They have to publicly state that they will follow the political leadership or Israel ceases to be a democracy, even though it controls Palestinians through a military dictatorship. But neither the military nor Netanyahu have any plan for extracting the military from Gaza with a victory in hand. They've succeeded in making the lives of Palestinians miserable through tactical moves like what we're seeing in Khan Yunis right now. Attacks all around Nasser Hospital, massacres are taking place as we speak, but these have achieved nothing militarily. Israel has previously always had a foe, an adversary that it could control or defeat, and now it faces not only in Hamas but in Hezbollah, something that it has failed to harm, and the soldiers who are going back for repeated tours. Many of the reservists have been on 3 tours. Netanyahu tried to issue an executive order extending their tour by another year. They're starting to become demoralized.
Well, that's why McGregor and Ritter are both reporting that they're exhausted, demoralized, and they want out. These are both elite officer corps and grunts.
Well, the grunts are reservists. I mean, Israel has a very small population and it forces all of its men to serve until like 35. And these are guys who aren't as well, they're not professional soldiers, and they're having to go in. They are starting to lose limbs and more soldiers than before in Rafah. This isn't something that's conveyed in the New York Times piece, but it's something I'm gathering through sources in Gaza or secondhand. And, you can watch also the Al-Qassam and Al-Quds brigades channels and see all the operations they're carrying out in Rafah. They're taking out a lot of armor. They're hitting soldiers. They're grinding them down, and it's not ceasing. Meanwhile, Israel is back in Shuja'iyah, which is a neighborhood east of Gaza City, where it claimed an operational hold earlier this year. In other words, they claimed that they had completely defeated the Al-Qassam brigades, wiped out an entire battalion there, and now they're back fighting. There is no way that they can leave and not come back and face Hamas again. It's impossible. And so Israel, what I think they're going to do is try to extract themselves from Gaza without declaring that they have left. Now, here's the other problem. They don't know who to replace Hamas with. First, they tried to get these kind of like the sellout families who are willing to do anything for a payoff. Hamas killed a lot of them. That didn't work out. Then they tried to get like the merchant class to work with them on getting aid in to set up a new regime. That failed. Now they're trying to go to this group that's basically the youth movement of Fatah, the rival to Hamas, which did some protests back in July 2023 against Hamas. That's not going to go anywhere. They don't have.
Bibi has no plan for the post-war Gaza.
Well, he refuses to even commit to any plan, and has said that he will not allow the Palestinian Authority to take over, and that's because of the fanatics in his coalition: Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, the fanatics from the Jewish Power Party, who are some of the most extreme figures to ever emerge.
Is that the ultra orthodox who just suffered a stinging defeat in the Israeli Supreme Court?
Well, that's not the ultra orthodox. The ultra orthodox are actually anti-Zionist, and they had engaged in a kind of marriage of convenience with the ultra Zionist right in order to prevent themselves from having to go into the army. And their rabbinate, their rabbinical leadership, refuses under any circumstance to allow their men to go into the Israeli army. So this is another problem for Israeli society. But just back to Gaza.
That's going to be a civil war.
Netanyahu refuses to even say the Palestinian Authority should take over. And the majority of Israelis, Jewish Israelis, reject the idea of militarily occupying Gaza ever again because it was a disaster to begin with. So they really have no way out of this endless war except to negotiate, which is what these generals and officers are calling for in this New York Times article. And then the other reason they want to negotiate and end it is because if they faced Hezbollah now, after being ground down for so long, 8 to 9 months in Gaza, they don't believe that they would survive that war. Hezbollah has yet to throw its full weight at Israel, even though it fired 100 rockets today into the north, into bases in the occupied Golan.
Here's an interesting Q&A. Whatever happened before we run the clip? Whatever happened to the Biden proposal, according to Cy Hirsch, Netanyahu proposal, according to Biden, for a ceasefire? But before you answer, you know the questioner and you know the person giving the non-answer who gets angry and smashes his podium with his fist. Cut number 6.
Can you tell us that with certainty that Israel accepts this?
Israel itself
have we heard the Prime Minister of Israel say?
Israel itself said that it accepted the proposal that the president laid out.
Did the Prime Minister say that himself?
They did.
Did he say that I accept this proposal as submitted and approved at the Security Council at the United Nations?
Said, I'm happy to help you look at Google after this and look up who in the Israeli government did or did not say things as it relates to the proposal.
One last
but
question.
I just want to be very clear that this is a proposal that Israel itself has said that they supported.
It's funny because Admiral Kirby said 7 or 8 times it's an Israeli proposal. Joe Biden said it's an Israeli proposal. Your friend, I say it sarcastically, Patel, says it's the president's proposal. It's apparently going nowhere.
Well, it may be a Biden proposal to defeat Medicare, but I think it's actually an Israeli proposal. Biden certainly doesn't know whose proposal it is at this point. The U.S., as is in its traditional role as Israel's lawyer, but that doesn't matter given the facts on the ground. And all we need to know is that Hamas will make a deal if there is a permanent ceasefire and Israel evacuates the Gaza Strip completely. And that is something that Netanyahu refuses to do and has said he will refuse to do under any circumstance. And the Biden administration is pushing the idea of a 6-week ceasefire. Now there's a new round of negotiations taking place, and the Mossad has forwarded a proposal to Netanyahu from Hamas. So, and the military, as we said, is putting unprecedented pressure on Netanyahu. They've come out of the closet and they want a ceasefire. Are we going to start seeing Israeli generals at a Palestine solidarity demonstration in New York City soon? I don't know, but they could have done this much earlier, saved many more of their hostages and captives. But for Netanyahu and the Israeli public, the Jewish Israeli public, which told pollsters in March, only 2% of them thought that the Israeli army had used too much firepower in Gaza, where they're not only committing genocide, but they're also committing geocide, having destroyed the majority of structures in every built-up area in Gaza. That was done to satiate the bloodlust of the Israeli public after October 7th, to recover the lost machismo of the Zionist spirit, which had always dominated Palestinians. And now I think the army has decided they've done that, and they're setting their sights on Netanyahu. This is not Netanyahu. I don't know if he will be able to wait till November for a Biden defeat, or January for a Donald Trump to come in to be able to get more favorable terms from Washington. And so,
the headline of the
it's insane to
Times
not do a deal now
says that the generals claim they're running out of munitions. They're at the head of the line. They get whatever we have. How can they be running out of munitions? And if they're running out of munitions and we're sending 3 plane loads a day and can't send more, how does this end?
I think this whole war has elucidated the insanity of the U.S. special relationship with Israel and how impossible it is to sustain this apartheid colony at this point, when so many of the adversaries that it has literally created have reverse engineered its technology and are now capable of dealing it much more than a bloody nose. The reason that those tanks are going into Gaza without, if that's even true, without tank shells, into an area where there are no tanks on the opposing side, they're basically just hitting buildings and blowing children's heads off. The reason they're doing that is because the army general staff is saving those munitions for Hezbollah, and with good reason. So no matter how many weapons the U.S. sends to Israel, it's never going to be enough, especially if Iran enters the fight, which means that the special relationship has completely failed. And on a political level, the U.S. has implicated itself in this genocide. It is shown that the rules-based order means nothing to it at all, and it has lost any moral high ground it had. Its soft power has collapsed. Within the Arab world, the liberals who hated the Islamist forces and always saw the West as a bastion of freedom and wanted to go on vacation to Berlin, they despise the United States now. You can read it in their writings. They are totally fed up. And so it's been a complete disaster for the U.S. on every level. And now militarily, the military that the U.S. basically helped create is failing in an area where it actually, when you think about it, shouldn't be that hard to defeat a counterinsurgency. It's not like they're in the rocky passes of Afghanistan or the hills of southern Lebanon, but they can't do it.
Max, thank you very much. Great analysis.
Russia's war on Ukraine has raged on now for over 2 years, and the cost to both sides have been immense. One of the possible spoils, however, of victory could also be what is in the ground. Ukraine has huge deposits of lithium. That's an important metal for batteries that power electric cars or smartphones.
Now, this is German news, DW, telling you why NATO is fighting to the end to take Ukraine, blaming it on Russia. But what I was studying, going over information before I bring it to y'all, nobody, even the people in Germany, nobody believe they BS. Everybody's calling them out in they comment section for their lies, and that no, you're the one trying to steal this 20 trillion in lithium, and the Russians won't allow it.
Fighting near the Ukrainian village of Korohovo earlier this year. Above the ground, towns that have seen dozens of tank battles since the war began. What you don't see is the hundreds of millions of dollars of lithium that geologists say is likely underground. Ukraine has significant deposits of natural resources that could make Russia's war financially pay off. In addition to lithium, there are significant...
Russia got way more than this. Rare earth minerals, all this shit is in Russia. Russia got way more minerals than any other country on the planet in Russia, and so much more still to be discovered and to be mined and stuff. It's EU and Europe who don't have this shit, you see, but they giving up their plan to the whole world, because a lot of people, I done report on this, a lot of people did not know about the $20 trillion worth of rare earth minerals and lithium, you know, that NATO, Lindsey Graham brought it up. He already said that the U.S. needs to get their hands on some of that, but they want to say it's Russia.
And oil, gas, metal ores, rare earth, and precious metals buried beneath the soil, potentially worth more than $20 trillion. Lithium is a key material for the future of electric cars and many smart technologies. Ukraine's deposits are located in the Kirovohrad and Donetsk regions. Kirovohrad is still under Ukrainian control, while much of Donetsk is occupied by Russia. Before the war, the European Union had its eye on Ukraine's deposits, especially of lithium. It currently imports almost all of the mineral from China. In 2021, the EU and Ukraine agreed to a strategic partnership for raw materials.
There is enormous potential because critical raw material essential for decarbonizing of our economies can be found in abundance in Ukraine.
According to the US, the war in Ukraine has cost Russia well over $1 trillion in economic losses, as well as hundreds of billions in expenses on the war itself. But the trillions hiding under Ukraine's fields and factories would far outweigh that in a war that's had such a massive human cost.
Well, joining me now from Washington is Gracelyn Bascaran. She's the director of the Project on Critical Mineral Security at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ms. Bascaran, it's good to have you with us tonight. Let's just look at the last few years. In 2020, the European Union approved the Green Deal, which meant demand for electric cars would soon surge, demand for lithium batteries as well. 6 months later, Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine. Is that a coincidence?
Resources have sometimes been an incentive, but I don't think there's any case for causation here. When we actually go back and look at how much lithium does Ukraine have, Ukrainian researchers have estimated that the eastern region has about...
No, it's not important. I just need to let y'all know that now they're trying to condition the people for Russia. Yes, now get the spoils of that war. Russia didn't start off giving a damn about Ukrainian lithium. Europe did. What Russia did is now block them from getting it. And now Russia get to keep it.
I wanted to lead today with something that I think, I don't want to say confirmed, because it came from the New York Times and it contained a lot of omissions, key omissions. Omissions as a form of propaganda, but it corroborated what you've been saying over and over and over again since April 2022, which is that there was a peace deal on the table. And this really colors our whole understanding of the Russian invasion or special military operation in Ukraine. There was a peace deal on the table between Ukraine and Russia. And the West came in and sabotaged it. And the New York Times has finally acknowledged the existence of this. I remember for a long time after Ukraine's Pravda paper revealed the details of this deal and Boris Johnson's sabotage of it, that the Western media played the role of denying its existence and undercutting that report. And now it's finally been revealed at I think a momentous time. So maybe you can take us through this and what the New York Times has left out, Aaron.
Now,
very
this
important.
is so important. Now, that's why I just played that piece about the $20 trillion in lithium and other resources up under the grounds of Ukraine, especially in the Donbas region. At least 15 trillion or 12 to 15 trillion is in the Donbas region, which Russia has in its hands the majority of it now. So it's going to make perfect sense why the U.S. killed the peace agreement. Russia went into Ukraine special military operation in February. In like a month, they had Ukraine ready for a peace agreement. But the U.S. and EU couldn't have that now. No, it's 20 trillion on the line.
Important to stress what you did, which is that the existence of these talks in Istanbul has been completely ignored for more than 2 years. The Times has barely acknowledged that Ukraine and Russia sat down immediately after Russia's invasion began, and they almost reached a deal in Istanbul. And if you were to read the Times over the last 2 years, you wouldn't know that happened. Sometimes they mention it in passing, but finally the Times, for the first time, acknowledges there were these talks in Istanbul. They came very close to a deal. And the Times has been the first outlet to actually publish the draft treaties in full. There's 3 documents that the Times published, and this is the first time that they've been revealed in full publicly. Putin has waved up a copy before, and actually skeptics of the Russian claim that there was almost a deal have said that, if Putin says there was a deal reached, how come he hasn't released the actual agreements? Well, the New York Times just did, and they're there in full. And they show that the premise was that Russia got Ukraine to accept permanent neutrality, so not joining NATO or any other military bloc, which, by the way, is not a radical concession on Ukraine's part. That was in Ukraine's founding constitution. It was previously enshrined as a goal of Ukraine to be permanently neutral until the Maidan coup, which reversed all of that, backed by the U.S. And basically, in exchange for committing to permanent neutrality, Russia would withdraw to the pre-invasion lines. The status of Crimea was basically left to be determined in future talks. And Ukraine would receive guarantees that it wouldn't be attacked again. We know what happened next. Boris Johnson came over to Kyiv, told Zelensky that we're not going to give you security guarantees,
they want that,
which Ukraine would need to reach this deal, because Ukraine wanted as a concession for declaring neutrality, that it would get the guarantee from states, including Russia and the U.S., to come to its defense in case it was attacked again. But Boris Johnson told Zelensky, we're not going to give you that, and you should keep fighting instead. And that's exactly what Ukraine did. And Ukraine got rewarded with tens of billions of dollars in additional NATO weaponry and funding, which also came at the cost of how many untold lives have died since. And so the Times, for the first time, acknowledges that there was almost this deal. Now, interestingly, they don't acknowledge that Boris Johnson came to Kyiv and told Zelensky that the West wouldn't back him up, which is a really huge omission, because Ukrainian sources have now confirmed this. So that's the Times still spinning for the Biden administration. But they do confirm that U.S. officials opposed these deals. There's a line in there in the Times that American officials were alarmed at the terms of this deal. And they told the Ukrainians that this would basically amount to a surrender. Like the term used in the article is that this would be a unilateral disarmament by Ukraine. So basically that's the Biden administration telling Zelensky again that they were opposed to it. But what's interesting, I think most interesting about this, on top of confirming that the Biden administration opposed peace, is that now we get a brand new excuse from Ukraine as to why they walked away. Because this article is obviously sourced to Ukrainian officials. And now for the first time, they're introducing a brand new excuse. And they're claiming that basically Russia at the last minute tried to throw in a clause that would have given Russia a veto over any future response to a potential Russian invasion again. So basically, under the deal, Russia is agreeing that there's going to be guarantor states for Ukraine. Like Russia is going to guarantee Ukraine security, and so will the U.S. And what Ukraine is saying at the last minute, Russia tried to throw in this excuse or this clause that basically says that if there's any future attack on Ukraine, then all the guarantor states, including Russia and the U.S., if they're going to respond to help Ukraine, It has to be mutually agreed on. So there's the language there. On the basis of a decision agreed to by all guarantor states. So basically, if Ukraine's attacked again, and if Ukraine asks for help from the guarantors, all of them have to agree. And so what Ukrainian officials are now saying, and a lot of people have unfortunately butt into their excuse, is that basically this would have given Russia a veto over any future response to future Russian aggression. So basically, Russia could invade Ukraine again, and then if Ukraine said, "Okay, we need help from our guarantor states," Russia could say, "No, we don't agree to this," and it has to be mutual. So therefore, nobody could come to Ukraine's help. The problem with that argument, though, is that this is Article 5, right, where this clause is mentioned. But Article 2 clearly says that, any state that's a party to this treaty, including the guarantors and any other state that's a party to it, can't attack Ukraine. So basically, if Russia were to invade Ukraine, it would already be violating the deal that it signed. So there's no way that Russia could then invade Ukraine again, thereby breaking Article 2, which says you can't invade Ukraine again, but then say no one can come help Ukraine because that's barred under Article 5. Like, you can't violate a treaty and then try to cite another provision of it to sustain your violation. It wouldn't make any sense. Nobody would take that seriously. It's not as if Russia invaded Ukraine again and then tried to point to Article 5, that the U.S. would say, okay, fine, you're right, sorry, we're not going to come help Ukraine because Article 5 says we can't unless you agree, even though Russia's already violating the part that says we can't invade again. So it's a completely phony excuse, and like on its face of it. And then there's the fact that this is a brand new excuse. This is the first time we're hearing this. We've previously gotten other excuses. The first time we got an excuse from Ukraine, they said it was because of Bucha, the alleged Russian atrocities in Bucha. But the problem with that excuse, even if you agree that Russia is guilty of everything it was accused of in Bucha, which I think is far from settled, there's plenty of countervailing evidence. But putting that aside, even if Russia was guilty of everything in Bucha, there's no way that could have been a reason for Ukraine to not take the deal, because they kept negotiating after the Bucha allegations surfaced. And Zelensky said accurately that the way to prevent more atrocities like we saw in Bucha is to make peace. And that's why we have to keep talking. So that excuse doesn't fly. And then we got a new excuse later on from the top Ukrainian negotiator, where he said that the reason why we couldn't do this is because we'd have to change our constitution. Because at that point, Ukraine's constitution said that they wanted to join NATO. But just as Ukraine previously changed its constitution to say they wanted to join NATO, they could just as easily change their constitution again to say we don't want to join NATO, because that was actually enshrined in Ukraine's founding constitution, that the goal is permanent neutrality. And then he also said that we couldn't just trust Russia. Okay, so that's the other excuse. But this brand new excuse that Russia tried to throw in a last-minute clause that would have vetoed a future response to Russian aggression against Ukraine, it just doesn't make any sense. What Russia, I think, was talking about there was that if, say, Ukraine gets into a fight with somebody else, like Belarus, which is not a party to the treaty, then at that point, there should be mutually agreed upon response, which is similar to the UN Security Council. If somebody vetoes it, you don't respond. So I don't think it's not that radical a demand. And regardless, it has nothing to do, I think, with Russia trying to protect its own future aggression against Ukraine. It just doesn't make any sense. The real explanation is what has already been in the public record. Ukrainian officials say they were told by the West that we're not going to give you security guarantees if you make a deal with Russia. And Boris Johnson told Ukraine to keep on fighting. That's what happened. And that's what the Times is continuing to cover up. But in the process, at least they're giving us some important new detail.
Yeah. They at least acknowledge the existence of these talks. And there's some hint, of course, the framing is propagandistic and entirely influenced by the thinking of these Western officials, but they give us a hint at how alarmed the U.S. and the Biden administration was with the prospect of peace. You highlighted this, Aaron. This is from the New York Times article. American officials were alarmed at the terms. In meetings with their Ukrainian counterparts, a senior Biden administration official were called. We quietly said, you understand this is unilateral disarmament, right? So there they are actually warning the Zelensky administration against engaging in these negotiations and taking up the deal with a false framing. This isn't unilateral disarmament.
Yeah, what they mean by that is this would roll back the NATO armaments in Ukraine that they've been undertaking for the last 8+ years, using the prospect of Ukraine's future NATO bid to militarize Ukraine, turning into a NATO proxy. And that's what they were alarmed by. And that's what they stopped.
Exactly. I mean, this deal would have essentially ended the Western front of the new Cold War. I mean, Ukraine was the key front of that war. Ukraine had been converted, the 2014 Maidan coup, into an anti-Russian enclave. That was the whole point. A neutral Ukraine, yes, it would mean peace for Ukraine. It would mean eventual end to the Ukrainian civil war that has seen parts of the country secede after thousands and thousands of death and so much misery, especially for the Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian population of the Donbass. It would mean severe reduction of, I think, the greatest civilizational threat today, the nuclear threat.
Of course.
But it would also hit Lockheed Martin executives and Raytheon executives and Victoria Nuland's paymasters in the pocketbook. So it couldn't happen. They were alarmed and it had to be sabotaged. And so here we are, tens and tens of thousands of deaths later, and Ukrainian men are afraid to go out in the streets of Kiev for fear that they will be captured, kidnapped by military police, hauled in a van and sent to what they call the meat grinder in a failing war with no clear purpose, which is expanding into a global conflict, as we'll discuss.
And just to confirm that there was a lot of progress made in this idea that Russia tried to sabotage the talks with this last minute clause that would have given them a veto over any response to their future aggression. A Ukrainian negotiator admitted that they made huge progress and that he said Putin did everything possible to make peace. And the Times actually quoted him. He said this back in December. The Times actually acknowledged some of his remarks for the full time, but not his full comments. So let's listen to what he said. This is Alexander Chaly. He's a veteran Ukrainian diplomat. He was a part of the delegation that negotiated in Istanbul. Listen to what he says.
I was in that moment in the group of Ukrainian negotiators. We negotiated with Russian delegation practically 2 months, in March and April, the possible peaceful settlement agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And we, as you remember, concluded so-called Istanbul communique. And we were very close in the middle of April, in the end of April, to finalize our war with some peaceful settlement. For some reasons, it was postponed. But to my mind, Putin, this is my personal view, Putin in 1 week after started his aggression in 24 February last year, very quickly understood he did mistake and tried to do everything possible to conclude agreement with Ukraine. And Istanbul communique, it was his personal decision to accept the text of this communique, which totally far away from the initial proposal of Russia, ultimatum proposal of Russia, which they put before the Ukrainian delegation in Minsk. So we managed to find a very real compromise. So Putin really wanted to reach some peaceful settlement with Ukraine. It's very important to remember.
I mean, it couldn't be more clear. He says Putin did everything possible to make peace. We found a real compromise. Basically, everything was resolved. And then he says, for some reason, it got postponed. So he doesn't tell us why the talks broke down, but it's obvious now. And other Ukrainian officials have filled in the details. And the Times, the first time, acknowledged some of his remarks, not all of them. But imagine if that clip had been played to Western audiences back when it came out, which is last December, on CNN and, every other show. I mean, we played it, but it's been kept from the public. But it couldn't be more clear than that. That's the Ukrainians saying that Putin did everything possible to make peace. And it's obvious why it didn't happen. The West stopped it.
The conflict in Ukraine continues to grind on. And as it does, the Western media, Western governments, even the Ukrainian government, are admitting critical shortages of extremely important capabilities like air defenses. They're also suffering from acute manpower shortages. All of this is adding up to a successful war of attrition for Russia. Again, we have to remember they are putting pressure along the entire line of contact. Their forces advance where Ukrainian lines begin to falter. They're not trying to break through. They're trying to put pressure on the entire line of contact until parts of it crumble. Then they exploit it. Let's take a look at the map. This is liveuamap.com. You have to remember this. It's a pro-Ukrainian map. They will resist showing Russian gains even when Ukraine itself is admitting that Russia has made advances. So just keep that in mind. But even still, looking at this map, it paints a very, very bleak picture. Everything in red is territory held by Russia, and especially here, this is territory Kiev claims is Ukrainian. And as you can see, these red rifle icons, this indicates Russian forces on the advance. They are on the attack. They're in these areas, even though they haven't consolidated control over them, or at least liveuamap.com is not admitting that they've consolidated control over these areas. And you see it all the way from Zaporozhye, from southern Donbas, all along the line of contact, all the way up to Kharkov here. And I'm going to explain here shortly how even the Western media is now admitting that Russia has made advances in Chasiv Yar. And again, you see here, this map is going to wait until the very last possible moment to show those advances. The Western media is admitting that while Ukraine has secured, stabilized the front line in Kharkov, where Russia has opened a new front, Russian forces are advancing in places like Chasiv Yar and elsewhere in the Donbas region. The whole point of opening the line in Kharkov was to force Ukraine to shuffle around reserves that it does not have, which would leave other areas along the line of contact vulnerable. And I'm going to show you news articles explaining this whole process, how this worked out. And it's not according to just Western media, Western commentators, analysts, or even Western governments. It's from Ukrainian military intelligence itself. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit more about what's been going on the line of contact. Now, this map isn't really showing it, but there have been a series of attacks, Russian strikes, missile strikes on Ukrainian air bases and the destruction of Ukrainian warplanes, what is left of their military aviation. So let's take a look at this article by David Axe, who I normally cite in Forbes. He's writing for The Telegraph in this case. Ukraine's new F-16 fighter jets will be destroyed as soon as they arrive. Russian ballistic missiles are pounding Zelensky's air bases. And you saw the image of an explosion at one of these air bases. And this is what I have said since the first notion of sending Western warplanes to Ukraine was proposed. These planes, first of all, Ukrainian pilots could never be trained to use them effectively in such a short time. And when they arrive in Ukraine, if they're operated out of Ukraine, they will be destroyed on the ground and in the air, just like the rest of Ukraine's Air Force. The whole reason they're sending NATO warplanes is because of the fact Ukraine's Soviet-era warplanes are all destroyed. Very few of them exist. This is what David Axe in The Telegraph writes. In a brutal and terrifying 3 days, so this wasn't an isolated incident, it was a campaign, Russia has wreaked havoc on the tiny, battered Ukrainian Air Force, lofting drones to surveil the Air Force's frontline airfields and then firing ballistic missiles to destroy hard-to-replace warplanes, or I would say impossible-to-replace warplanes. As the missile campaign continues and the toll mounts, 4 or 5 aircraft were destroyed in 72 hours. Russia is saying more than that. It's increasingly clear just one thing can save what's left of Ukrainian air power: more Western-made air defenses. Well, those physically don't and will not exist. So if that was the one thing that could save Ukraine, I guess Ukraine is not going to be saved. It continues. It says the current wave of attacks began on July 1st when a Russian drone spotted 6 Ukrainian Air Force Sukhoi Su-27 fighters parked in the open in broad daylight on the tarmac at Mirgorod Air Base, 100 miles from Ukraine's northern border with Russia. A Russian Iskander missile struck, destroying 2 of the supersonic fighters. And the Iskander is the Russian version of ATACMS, only it has a longer range, Russia has many more of these available to them in many different configurations than Ukraine will ever have ATACMS, just so you know. The next day, it happened again. A Russian drone flew circles over the Ukrainian airbase in Poltava, just east of Mirgorod. After hours of surveillance, another Iskander missile struck, damaging, if not destroying, a Ukrainian Army MiL Mi-24 gunship helicopter, of which Ukraine has very few left. The attacks continued on July 3rd. This time, the Russians targeted Dolginskovo Air Base near Kryvyi Rog, 45 miles from the front line in southern Ukraine. A drone scanned the base, and as many as 30 Iskanders rained down, destroying what appeared to be a Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 fighter. Each of the attacks was preventable. No, they were not. If the Ukrainians had promptly shot down the drones, the Russians wouldn't have known where to aim their Iskanders, but they didn't shoot down the drones. There's no evidence they even tried. And the reason they didn't is because they have no air defenses left. They have no air defenses left because even as this liveuamap.com explains, Ukrainian air defenses shot down 24 drones overnight. These are the Garan-2 kamikaze drones, long-range kamikaze drones. Russia makes hundreds and hundreds of these, and they send them in these huge waves. And they force Ukraine to use what they have of their air defense to shoot them down. If they don't shoot them down, they will hit critical infrastructure and military targets. The point of these drones is not necessarily to outsmart Ukraine's air defenses, to saturate them and exhaust them, which is exactly what they have successfully done. So to say that these could have been prevented, yes. In an ideal world where Ukraine had infinite air defense capabilities, this could have been prevented. But in reality, this is a war of attrition. Russia is successfully winning that war of attrition. They have no air defenses left to shoot down these drones, so it could not be prevented. David Axe is going to claim that Ukraine still somehow has 90% of their air defense capabilities, which is just complete nonsense. It is not true. It's based on this so-called open source intelligence that has been proven over and over again to simply be repackaged war propaganda. These are the same websites and individuals online who told people in 2023 that Ukraine's offensive was going to just simply roll over depleted Russian forces, because as they had been counting up with their open source intelligence, the Russian military had been destroyed 10 times over. So there was nothing left along their defense lines when Ukraine launched their NATO-trained, NATO-armed offensive in 2023. They were just going to roll through to the Sea of Azov. And as we know, what happened instead, and as the Wall Street Journal itself reported in their headline, it hit a wall of steel, Russian defenses, and it was comprehensively defeated, as Alexander Mikaris of the Duran likes to remind people. It didn't just fail, it was comprehensively defeated. So these open source intelligence projects are war propaganda. They are verifiably putting out false information that does not reflect the reality on the battlefield. So for David Axe to continuously cite them, despite it making him continuously wrong about every aspect of this conflict, forcing him to then write articles like this, conceding that, yes, actually, yes, Ukraine is the one losing. Russia is the one that still has resources available, and it is continuously tilting this battle further in Russia's favor. So this is what he says. In theory, the Ukrainians still have 90% of their pre-war air defense force, but it's scattered more widely than it was before 2022. No, this is untrue. They simply do not have it. It does not exist. Russian bombardment of Ukrainian cities has compelled the Air Force to concentrate its best air defenses around the biggest population centers. This has left many military installations less protected. It's demonstratively false. And he proves it because the article he links to is this from the UK government. UK condemns Russia's bombardment of Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure. UK statement to the OSCE. They're talking about how, yes, Russia is attacking these population centers, striking at the power grid. And as the Western media and the Ukrainian government admit, it has been destroyed. It is 80% or more destroyed. So if that's where the air defenses are, And that is what they're protecting. And 80% of their power grid is now destroyed. Obviously, they don't have 90% of their air defense protecting the power grid. It's gone. It does not exist. It is not protecting the power grid. It is not protecting their military installations. So what he's actually saying is false. They're just simply out of air defenses, and there are no more coming. This is what David X claims. Some relief is coming. Before last month, Ukraine had just 3 batteries of its best American-made Patriot long-range surface-to-air missiles. Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States have since pledged 3 additional batteries plus some spare launchers, and a $2.3 billion aid package that the United States announced on July 3rd includes big consignments of missiles for the Patriot batteries, as well as separate medium-range air defenses. And they're talking about NASAMS there, which fire a air-to-air missile that is being used in the surface-to-air role. So what is he talking about? These 3 batteries that are coming. This is the collective West scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel. This is all they have left to spare. And this is from the New York Times. Europe seeks to solve the Patriot puzzle in Ukraine, with Ukraine clamoring for more air defenses. That is Zelensky right here. He wants to double air defense capabilities through the summer, which is impossible and will never happen. And the reason it will never happen is because of what the New York Times explains in this article. Officials are trying to scrape together a Patriot battery from spare parts scattered across the continent. A European plan to give Ukraine another Patriot air defense system, so just one other battery. They're trying to scrape together just one more battery to protect its battered cities from Russian airstrikes is coming together piece by piece. But as the Western media admits, they cannot protect their power grid. They cannot even protect their most valuable military installations. So these Patriot missile batteries that they have right now are not working. They are not working. And I'll explain why they're not working here in just a minute. And why sending more batteries is not the solution. So they're putting it together piece by piece, just to scrape together one extra battery. The radar and 3 missile launchers are being supplied by the Netherlands. Some interceptor missiles are coming from a 4-country coalition led by Germany. A mobile fire control center has been promised, though officials won't say from where or by whom. Additional missiles and launchers, as well as training for Ukrainians to use the sophisticated system, will be provided by as many as 8 countries. And we have seen how when you are pulling resources from a multitude of countries, all of whom have a different process of doing all of this, you are going to run into problems. This is the problem Ukraine has had this entire time. They're getting a multitude of different vehicles, different versions of the same vehicle from a multitude of countries. They're getting different training from different countries. They have to establish different supply chains for different vehicles they're getting from different countries. It vastly overcomplicates an already daunting logistical challenge. And in this New York Times article, they admit that because you're scraping together different components from entirely different Patriot systems, which span many, many years, so there's many versions, there's many updates, there's different versions of software and hardware that are used in the Patriot missile systems. They're not interoperable. So you will get an old command center, you're trying to mix it with a mixture of different launchers and a radar. You're going to have to figure out a way to get them to work together. It's like trying to get a floppy disk to work with your smartphone. It can be done, but you have to build custom hardware to do it. You might even need custom software to do it. It can be done. It says in the article it can be done, but it takes extra time and money. And the whole reason they're doing this is because they don't have new batteries, complete batteries that they can just send to Ukraine. That is the huge problem that they have. What about the interceptors themselves? And this is the main reason why no matter how many Patriot missile systems or NASAM systems you send to Ukraine, it doesn't matter because they don't have the missiles needed to fire at incoming Russian targets, especially missiles. So this is what David Axe says specifically. He again, I'm going to just reread what he said. A $2.3 billion aid package that the United States has announced on July 3rd, including a big consignment of missiles for Patriot batteries, as well as separate medium-range air defenses. He's talking about this. This was the most recent security assistance for Ukraine. This was announced July 3rd. People will remember I just did an update about the June 7th package right here. And if you look at them, they're almost identical. It's almost the exact same items on both lists. And I mentioned back in early June that the reason it is the same items over and over again is because their stockpiles are depleted. They don't have huge amounts of this type of equipment, this type of ammunition to send Ukraine. They're now drawing from monthly production, which is not much. And they cannot send all monthly production directly to Ukraine. Other nations require it to maintain their military readiness. So Ukraine is getting tiny, almost negligible amounts of all of these weapons and all of this ammunition. And what David Axe is talking about is, as you can see, the only air defense system mentioned is Hawk, the Hawk air defense system. This is something that the US had been phasing out for decades. The last military branch in the US to use it was the US Marines. They phased it out in 2002. And since then, the US military has depended on Stingers, including in the Avenger configuration, and the Patriot missile system. No, nobody uses Hawk missile systems in the United States anymore. But this is what the US is sending, relics of the Cold War, museum pieces. That is what they are sending to Ukraine because they have no additional Patriot systems to send. They don't have enough missiles for the Patriot missile systems that they have sent. They don't have enough missiles for the NASAMS systems that they have sent. And they admit here in this release that under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, this is a fund, they're using $2.2 billion to purchase interceptors for Patriot and NASAMS air defense systems for Ukraine. That means these missiles, and Voice of America actually, right here in this article, this is from July 3rd, US sending Ukraine badly needed air defense missiles. And it's funny because they show the Hawk right here, this antiquated, ineffective air defense system that we have heard nothing about in terms of operation in Ukraine. In here, they admit the second part of the package, valued at $2.2 billion, will be used to purchase missiles for Ukraine's Patriot missile defense system and more national advanced surface-to-air missile systems, NASAMS. Those systems will need to be assembled and will be delivered at a later date. So they're talking about purchasing yet-to-be manufactured missiles and systems. That is what they're talking about. So these don't exist. They don't physically exist. They're allocating money to buy them someday in the future when they may exist. And here I included an article about Germany delivering a third Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. So they announced this recently. This was July 5th, 2024. But let's talk about the reason why it doesn't matter how many Patriot missile systems you send to Ukraine. The reason why is because not enough missiles exist for them to fire. The United States, admittedly, only makes 550 Patriot missile interceptors per year. So the Russian Federation is launching over 4,000 missiles at targets all across Ukraine every single year. 550 missiles a year works out to about 45 to 50 missiles a year. 50 because eventually the US plans to make 600. That is their plan to expand production from 550 to 600 a year. So I'm being generous by adding in 50 missiles a month. Russia is firing over 330 missiles every single month. When you think about air defense standard operating procedure, the necessity of launching at least 2 interceptors per incoming target to increase the probability of intercepting that target, because the probability of launching 1 missile and intercepting it is not 100%. You launch 2 to ensure that it's intercepted. If you take that into consideration, you can see just how vastly outgunned Ukraine is, how no amount of Patriot systems and missiles available that physically exist sent to Ukraine can solve this problem. If every single Patriot missile system on Earth today, along with every single Patriot missile interceptor, was sent to Ukraine, it would not be enough to intercept these 4,000 plus missiles hitting targets across Ukraine every single year. And remember, the Western media itself admits that Russia is expanding missile production. It's not running out of missiles. It is expanding the number of missiles that it has available to it. The Western media, although they're not going to come out and say it as directly, if you read these articles and you think about it objectively, they are telling you that Ukraine is decisively losing the air defense missile battle that's taking place over Ukraine. They are admitting that. They're also pretty much openly admitting, this is what David Axe's article is about. The F-16s that are going to be sent are going to make absolutely no difference at all whatsoever. And David Axe is fanatically pro-Ukrainian. He's just being realistic. Maybe he's tired of being wrong all the time. I'm sure he has written articles in the past talking about how the F-16s were going to be game changers. He's heading that off at the pass by finally admitting ahead of time what is actually going to happen versus what he wishes was going to happen. So not only is Ukraine losing this missile war in its airspace, it is also losing the war along the line of contact, the ground war, which this conflict is essentially a ground war. And we know this also because of Western media reports. Now, we were looking at the live map, the pro-Ukrainian live map, and they were very reluctant to show the progress Russia has been making in Chasiv Yar. This is a Guardian article. This is from July 5th. Ukraine war briefing. Ukrainian army confirms retreat from part of key town of Chasiv Yar. A fall of strategically important town in eastern Ukraine would bring Moscow closer to aim of capturing entire Donetsk region. So this isn't the Guardian claiming this. This is the Guardian citing the Ukrainian government admitting this. Ukraine's army has retreated from a neighborhood on the outskirts of Chasiv Yar, strategically important town in the eastern Donetsk region that has been reduced to rubble under a months-long Russian assault, a military spokesperson said. And this was on July 4th. Chasiv Yar is a short distance west of Bakhmut, which was captured by Russia last year after a bitter 10-month battle. 4 months, Russian forces have focused on capturing Chasiv Yar, a town which occupies an elevated location. Its fall would put nearby cities in jeopardy, compromise critical Ukrainian supply routes, and bring Russia closer to the stated aim of seizing the entire Donetsk region. And keep all of that in mind when Chasiv Yar does completely fall, and these same Western sources claim that it was an insignificant town with a tiny population, is completely meaningless. And so Russia's victory is entirely hollow, which is what they actually said about Bakhmut. But you can see how one town or city captured leads to the next, and how all of this is putting tremendous pressure on Ukraine's military, its fighting capacity, pressure that it cannot bear, demonstrably so. Now, this most recent article from just over the last week confirms what people were saying when Russia opened its front in Kharkov, that was not an attempt to storm into the region, take the city of Kharkov, and their failure to take the city meant that the offensive was a failure. The whole point of doing that was to force Ukrainian reserves to move to Kharkov, allowing Russia to make advances elsewhere, including Chasiv Yar. And it wasn't me saying that, just imagining that. It wasn't other analysts imagining that. It was the head of Ukrainian military intelligence saying that. This is from the New York Times. This was from May 14th, 2024. Facing Russian advance, a top Ukrainian general paints a bleak picture. Ukraine's forces are stretched and have minimal reserves to draw on, the chief of military intelligence said, in addition to shortages of weapons, which is what I have been saying for over 2 years now. This is a war of attrition. Ukraine is running out of manpower, equipment, weapons, and ammunition. Now, the head of Ukrainian military intelligence is openly admitting this. This is being reported by the New York Times. And this is what General Budanov, because that's who they're talking about. General Budanov, head of Ukrainian military intelligence, this is what he said, according to the New York Times. All of our forces are either here in Kharkov or in Chasiv Yar, he said, referring to a Ukrainian stronghold about 120 miles further south that Russian troops have assaulted in recent weeks. I've used everything we have. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone else in the reserves. So what he was explaining there was that By opening a new front, Russia is forcing Ukraine to choose between stopping Russian advances in the Donbas or stopping Russian advances in Kharkov. And so Ukraine chose to stop, to stabilize the front in Kharkov. And now we have articles confirming that exactly what General Budanov warned about. Ukraine is losing Chasiv Yar one part at a time. One important key part at a time. It's a heavily fortified position. It's not just some random town that Ukrainians showed up at to try to stop the Russians. Ukrainians are deeply entrenched there. And so any progress at all is demonstrating the cracks that are beginning to show all along the line of contact across Ukrainian lines. Now, all of this, these admissions that Russia's war of attrition is working, there are efforts to perform what you could call damage control. You have articles like this, and that is exactly what these articles are. If you look at articles like this from the New York Times, Russia sends waves of troops to the front in a brutal style of fighting. More than 1,000 Russian soldiers in Ukraine were killed or wounded on average each day in May, according to NATO and Western military officials. These are the same NATO and Western military officials that told you Russia was going to run out of missiles in 2022, that Ukraine's 2023 offensive was going to reach the Sea of Azov because Russian forces were stretched out and exhausted, their equipment and ammunition depleted. And now they're telling us that it's Russia, not Ukraine, suffering catastrophic losses, even as Ukraine itself admits they're out of manpower, they're out of ammunition, their air defenses are depleted. How could it possibly be that still somehow they're killing more Russians than they themselves are losing troops, despite having no resources to fight Russia with? When I say no resources, I mean no resources to slow or stop Russian advances, let alone reverse them. And we could easily debunk these claims of such catastrophic Russian losses, because there is a source out there objectively, at least attempting to objectively assess Russian losses. They're suspiciously quiet about Ukrainian losses, but they're trying to at least come up with a process that makes sense in terms of assessing Russian losses. So this is Media Zona, is put together by a US-backed Russian opposition group. This is Russian losses in the war with Ukraine, Media Zona count updated. So they update this constantly. They comb the information space for information about Russian losses, obituaries, publicly available information about Russian soldiers who have died in the conflict. And as you can see, this is the very beginning, February 2022, and this goes all the way up to June 13th. Has not quite reached July, and there is a lag. It's important to understand there is a lag. So if you look at from, say, May, June to July, when July numbers become available, they will be initially lower than they ultimately will be when they come through all of the data entirely. But I have found by spot checking their tallies during that actual month, and then 3, 4, 5 months later, their final tally, there's about an 8% increase in numbers. Say Bakhmut. This is Bakhmut. This is the battle for Bakhmut. This is the battle for Avdiivka. This was actually the Ukrainian offensive, the 2023 offensive. You can see the decline in Russian losses that this pro-Ukrainian, pro-NATO, pro-US source is reporting. You can see a decline in Russian losses during the 2023 Ukrainian offensive. When they went on the offensive in Avdiivka, you see this increase, and then there's another decrease. Even if you doubled these numbers, you would not be reaching 1,000 casualties. You would not be reaching 1,000 casualties. And you have to remember, there's a difference between deaths, which is what this website is showing, and casualties. And I'm using a 3 injured per 1 dead ratio, which is extremely favorable to Ukrainian propaganda, and it still doesn't add up. If you go to the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center, non-fatal casualties and the changing costs of war, they talk about a ratio of 10 injured to 1 combat death to 17 injured to 1 combat death. And what many pro-Ukrainian commentators will say, well, American battlefield medicine is exceptional and Russia doesn't come anywhere even close. But even if you cut it in half, even if you cut it even further, again, three injuries to one combat fatality still doesn't add up to what these NATO and Ukrainian sources are saying. So these stories of catastrophic Russian losses, this is damage control. They're citing sources we know have provided us, deliberately so, provided us false information about all aspects of this conflict. And they're doing it again as a means of coping with their Ukrainian proxies losing this proxy war.
小麦出口国，现在却有大约55%的人口面临粮食不安全状况。美国对此负有不可推卸的责任。事实证明，美国打着反恐的旗号，心里装的是掠夺资源的算计，把人权挂在嘴边，却侵犯别国人民的生存权和生命权。声称要捍卫民主、自由、繁荣，实际上在不断地制造人道危机。美方应当切实尊重叙利亚的主权和领土完整，立即结束在叙利亚的非法驻军，停止掠夺叙利亚国家资源，以实际行动弥补对叙利亚人民造成的伤害。
Let's learn more now. Crossing live to our RT contributor Carl Jarre. Hey, Carl, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the program today. What a story this is. I know you know it so well. I mean, at the end of the day, the United States, it's been accused countless times of smuggling resources out of Syria, but you never hear a word about it among the Western media or the Western politicians. They just stay mum. Why do you think that is, Carl?
Because it's indefensible. The U.S. claimed to going to Syria to fight ISIS. Well, now it's 2024. Almost a decade later, U.S. occupational forces is still illegally squatting on 1/3 of Syria's sovereign territory. And this 1/3 of Syria is a wheat-producing region of Syria. It's not only its food basket, but it's also the oil-producing region of Syria. So all these resources have been cut off from majority of the Syrian people. And on top of that, U.S. and its Western allies are levying sanctions against Syrian people. So now the Syrian people are facing food shortages while their food on their sovereign Syrian land are being shipped out. This is obscene. This is why there's so little coverage in the Western media, because they know it's indefensible.
Yeah, you also got to ask yourself the question, you know, how many American taxpayers are actually even aware there's a U.S. military contingent still even in Syria? You know, I had a guest on earlier, Carl, who was saying, Esteban Carrillo, and he was saying one thing that people don't talk about is the sanctions, which you mentioned, the sanctions against Syria. It's one thing that 10 years ago, America tried to do regime change in Syria. It tried to get rid of the Assad regime for the sake of essentially gas pipelines from the Caspian Sea, but they've been sanctioning the populace of Syria. You know, you got to ask yourself, why would you sanction everyday, ordinary people who are already suffering after what was a foreign-started war in that country? I mean, Carl, let me ask you, America's got oil, it's got gas, it's got a printing press. Does it need to go and pillage another country in the Middle East to get its natural resources?
Well, this is never about development for America. This is always about shoring up the U.S. hegemony and the U.S. hold on the world. Alan Greenspan was very explicit in his memoir. He said, oh, you know, we may not have gone into Iraq to grab the oil, but we went to Iraq to dictate where the oil will flow, because we noticed that a lot of the Middle East oil now flow to the east, to China in particular. The United States want to have a say where those oil flow in the world market. And U.S. this is the thing. The U.S. empire can't help it. You know, once it decided it's in the business of constructing a global empire, it has to be everywhere at once. The U.S. already waged a proxy war against the Syrian state since 2011, since the so-called Arab Spring, and ever since, U.S. has never left. U.S. has proxy forces. It's pillaging the resource of Syria, and on top of that, it maintains a very stringent sanction. And why do they do this? Why do they sanction the common people of Syria? But this has always been the U.S. policy. Madeleine Albright responded when about why U.S. maintains sanctions against Iraq as causing 500,000 children to die every year with lack of food and medicine. And Madeleine Albright said, "It's a price we think is worth it." That has been the U.S. policy.
That was right. That was right. She was asked in an interview, what about, the deaths of all these hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children and babies? And Madeleine Albright said, hey, it's all worth it. That's amazing. It was, what's that guy, Lindsey Graham in America? He said that paying Ukraine to fight Russia is the best money he's ever spent. This is the kind of people we're dealing with right now, And just on a side note, the Houthis continue supporting the Palestinians because the Houthis are against genocide. But then America bombs the Houthis. You got to wonder which true side of morality is the United States on these days. And Carl, you mentioned Iraq, all right? So we see these American convoys, they steal Syrian oil, they go into Iraq. Go back to the invasion of Iraq. Why did America go into Iraq? Well, one of the reasons was, as you mentioned, Saddam Hussein wanted to kick out the US petrodollar. He wanted a gold dinar commodity to be used instead of the US petrodollar. Saddam had to go. Guess what? Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, he wanted a pan-African gold dinar to bump out the petrodollar. Guess what? He had to go as well. So as you say, the hegemon has to be everywhere at once to maintain its hegemon. But I had a guest in here earlier, by the way. We were talking about BRICS and this kind of stuff. And she said the BRICS might be the new hegemon because we're seeing such tectonic movement around the world today. America, I'm sorry to say it, it's losing its influence. A lot of the people of the world in the global south, they're standing up. They're creating these new alliances. Why are we seeing, Carl, the BRICS developing from an idea into a true living entity, from the BRICS to the SCO to the ASEAN to the global south? Why are we seeing this uprising occurring?
Well, BRICS originally was an acronym coined by Goldman Sachs, but now it's becoming a reality because the world outside of the U.S.-dominated Western alliance they're getting sick and tired of the unipolar U.S. hyperpower just stampeding all over the globe, trampling over sovereignty. The BRICS, I wouldn't call BRICS a hegemon because what BRICS is about the respect of sovereignty, which is the empires they don't believe in sovereignty. United States do not believe in individual sovereignty of the states, whereas countries like Russia and China, they're truly one of the last few sovereign nations in the world because they can say no to the United States, and the other states can see that and they want to be part of that. They also want to be part of a group that can say no to the U.S. hegemony.
All right, RT contributor Carl.
Many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox, and a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to, but the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling. You take him for a friend.
Spread the word! Have you heard? All across the nation, we are going to be a great generation. Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment.
poor girl had her soul crushed on national television. And this isn't some cheap fake or AI generated video. That was Dementia Joe, the real Dementia Joe, completely ignoring and brushing off that young black girl. It's like she was invisible to him. That guy right there, that's the Dementia Joe that the world needs to see. I've seen everyone posting videos about the interview on ABC last night. I don't care about that. That was a choreographed show for the masses. It was sanitized, it was orchestrated, and he still flubbed it. But this video that I'm showing you is the most significant piece of news that came out of yesterday's appearances by Dementia Joe. And very few people were even mentioning it, and you won't see it anywhere on the mainstream media. They don't dare, because this is the real Dementia Joe. The narration that you heard in that video was Martin Luther King Jr.'s granddaughter. I used that audio and the words of Malcolm X because I felt it was so fitting for that video. If you missed what happened, watch it again closely and focus on this young black girl.
There are many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling. You take him for a friend.
Spread the word! Have you heard? All across the nation, we are going to be a great generation. Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality. We are going to be the generation that dismantles systemic racism once and for all, now and forever.
I know some of you may watch that and say, Barry, why are you making such a big deal about this? That's because that is the real Dementia Joe. That is the unscripted Dementia Joe. This is a video that Trump needs to see. This is a video that Charlemagne the God needs to see. This is a video that Stephen A. Smith needs to see. Trust me, this is campaign ending. If enough black people see this, Dementia Joe will lose a massive amount of the black vote. They can't possibly lie their way out of this. And sorry, Karine Jean-Pierre, there is no spin you could make that can explain away what Dementia Joe did to that young black girl. This is one of the worst things I've ever seen in a video. This young black girl is excited to see Dementia Joe. Look at her. She smiles. She says hi to him. She tilts her head, and he completely ignores her. Look, she's crushed right there. In fact, she's getting brushed aside, actually moved out the way. Get out of the way as Dementia Joe reaches out to the young, I don't know if they're Hispanic or white girls sitting there, and he won't even acknowledge that that black girl is even in front of him. He's completely ignoring her. Look, he's hugging that girl. Look, she's got to get out the way. How insulting can that be? She reaches out with her hand to try and get his attention, and he won't even turn his head. Not even. He goes on to the next white woman. This is egregious. I cannot believe that people aren't talking about this on the mainstream media. That poor black girl who came out there, she was probably told to go out there, looked like she was in her high school uniform. She was absolutely crushed. Look at her face right there. That was a soul-crushing moment. He absolutely obliterated that young girl. There's no excuse for it. There's nothing. There's no way that they can explain away this. This young girl, still in her school uniform, is just brushed away. To me, it's incredible that we would even be looking at this and not just be in a complete uproar. And I'm not just making this up. I don't really care about Dementia Joe, but I care about people. And I'm looking at somebody who's there. She had a bright smile. She was so enthusiastic about meeting the president. And the president didn't want anything to do with her. Nothing. It was like she was invisible, as I said earlier. He didn't even acknowledge her existence. How can you, Whoopi Goldberg or Sonny on The View, how can you possibly explain how this young black girl was treated? Oh, he might not have realized. What do you mean not realized? He moved her out the way. He pushed her out the way. How could he not have realized that she was standing there? She's not a really diminutive young woman. She's kind of big. She's standing there. She obviously stands out because it's like the only black face in the crowd. And he takes a selfie with the white gentleman, moves across, sees her, completely ignores her, and moves on to the other women. Just completely ignored her. I'd love to hear any liberal come to me and tell me and explain what you just saw. What you're seeing right now on the screen, you tell me how that's okay. You tell me how someone who's not inherently racist would do that. I can tell you right now, if that was my kid, I'd be pissed off. I would be absolutely in an uproar that that's how she was treated by the President of the United States. She was insignificant. This is someone who came to your rally, was excited about meeting you, was holding up one of your signs right in front of your face, and you blew her off. You just pushed her aside. So I think this is a really big deal. You guys can let me know in the comments what you think, but to me, this is a huge deal, especially in a campaign season, as much heat as he's been taking with the black community to completely ignore, brush off, and move her out the way. I don't want to meet you. I don't want to even acknowledge your presence. You are not important enough to me for me to even recognize that you're standing at my rally with a sign. I want nothing to do with you. Am I wrong? Tell me. You're seeing the video. He obviously sees her. He goes here, and then he skips her and goes to these other women and then brushes her out the way. And then the black girl kind of reaches out with her hand as to say, Mr. President, oh, hey, I'm right here. Can you see me? Not interested. I don't really care. You mean nothing to me. You are less than nothing. You are unhuman, as Jack Posobiec would say. It's astounding to me. It's upsetting. Obviously, you can see that he would treat somebody like that. This is so abhorrent that even white people can see it. Remember, they have no problem labeling Trump a racist. They have no problem calling Trump, Adolf, that guy from Germany. They have no problem saying that. They will go on television 24/7 and say Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist. But I want to ask you a question. Can you even imagine what the coverage would be like if Trump did that? And you know how they always talk about Trump supporters? We're the cultists. Wait until you see how Dementia Joe's supporters treated that young girl. So this is a wider angle cut. Now, when you see something, all right. So there's the young black girl holding the sign right in front of his face. He stops to talk to the white gentleman here. I want you to pay real close attention to the woman on the far right, a little old lady, little white lady. I'm going to call her the hag. Forget Biden. Focus on that woman on the right with the blonde hair. Watch how she treats this young black girl. Okay, so she's getting ready for her selfie. The black girl's got the sign, and it's in the way. And she's not liking it, and watch this. Pulls her sign away, and now she's pissed off. Now she's pissed that this girl got in her way, and now she's letting her know, I don't like that you're even here. Probably. Look at her. She's yelling at her at this point. Oh, she's so ticked off. Now it's going to get worse. Now she's actually going to grab her sign probably, and she's pissed off. Look at her. Look at her. She is so ticked off. And this black girl thinks she's going to get to meet the president. Now watch the white lady in the corner there. Here it comes. She's taking her picture, and she's not happy whatsoever. Look at her face. She's so ticked off. Now here it comes. Oh, come on, move that sign. Oh, get that sign out of my face. Come on, girl, get rid of this thing. You're in my way. You're in my way. You see who this? Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? All right, move that sign, put it down there, do something. Lady, I'm trying to get the president's attention. I don't care. I'm here. You're black. Get out of my way. Hey, listen, I have a right to stand here too. Not just you. Can't we both just watch the president? I'm just sick of this. And this lady is just pissed off. Absolutely pissed. Still giving a girl the what for. Look at her face, the scowl on her face. And she just wants to meet the president. And now you saw that part. Hey, how you doing, Miss President? Whatever. I'm going to move over to this lady, and I'm going to give her the hug. That's your president, people. That's Joe Biden. That's the guy that everybody is saying is a better man than Trump. He's Grandpa Joe. Boy, man, if that was my daughter, I would have probably popped them. The Secret Service would have been all over me. Forget the interview. This is the most significant piece of news that came out of everything that happened yesterday. And trust me, even though the news isn't covering this, people who have seen this video are tweeting about it, and they are pissed. This is from a guy named John Curtis. I'm not sure if he was the one who filmed this video, because smitten black girl rejected by Biden, who instead stopped to take selfies with angry old white woman. How dare you, Joe? Your racist behavior broke this girl's heart. And you can see in two pictures side by side there. Let me see if I can pull these pictures up for you. Hi. Oh, crushed. Completely crushed. Heart crushed. Why am I even here? Oh, my goodness. Next one. Joe Biden doesn't sniff black people. Oh, man. The next one, you can see her vote changing as it happens. She looked too young to vote, but I think she realizes right now you're bet on the wrong horse. You're backing the wrong type of candidate. What a joke. Trump should bring her to one of his events and show her what all supporters should be treated like. That was sad AF. Absolutely was sad. This is from Jim. A Trump voter has just been made. Indeed. That is so sad, so sad. That young girl did not deserve that. The anticipation in her face to meet the president was so obvious. I guarantee if that young girl was white, Joe Biden would have been all over her. He is a disgrace. And that's from, looks like a younger white woman. Truth. And that girl just got an in-your-face dose of Dementia Joe's lifelong true racism. He totally avoided her, and the look on her face, she knows it. She even tried again to get his attention, but he continued to ignore her. Shame he has fooled so many people, indeed. I hope she learned that this pretty much sums up the Democratic Party's platform with regard to black people. You ain't black if you don't vote for me. Every 4 years, same old stuff. That's what they tell the black people. This is one of the saddest things I've seen in a very long time. Joe shows his true self. I really don't know what to say. He is so unaware, unmindful, neglectful. Joe has a heart that is ice cold dead. He's not a Catholic. So that's obviously a Catholic man who saw what he did to this young girl, and he's had it. Tracy Smith. A true racist never changes who they are. They just try to cover it up. Amen. Absolutely. That broke my heart to watch. Poor baby girl. Yeah, it was so sad. Wonder how many people need to see this to see the truth. That's amazingly true. How many people need to understand this is how this guy is? This is what's in his heart. This is unscripted. What you saw was the real Dementia Joe. Didn't have any handlers near him. Didn't have any script. Boom, I'm going to skip this black girl. Not interested. He shows his true colors over and over, but the Democrats just say it's lies and fake news and cheap fake videos. Well, here's video, but they will somehow blame it on a trip from last fall. Unbelievable. The most racist American president in modern history, and yet black Americans will still vote for this man because people like Charlemagne the God and Stephen A. Smith and Whoopi Goldberg keep pushing this narrative, but they'll never show you this clip. Never. None of them will ever show you this clip. It's embarrassing to them as well. This is the guy that they have pushed. This is the guy that they have decided they want as president, and he is unbelievably racist. You can see it. There is no other explanation for what you just saw. What a campaign ad for Trump. That's what I'm saying. This is the newest, bestest ever campaign ad for Donald Trump. He should run it nonstop in every black television station, every black show in the country and online. Sherm Horn says, that is legitimately one of the saddest videos I've ever seen. I feel bad for that poor girl, and it keeps going forever. He ignores her for so long. I could go on and read tweets for hours. The real people out there have seen this video. Just not enough of them. I mean, right now, it just seems like this is beginning to have a groundswell. I know one of those video cuts had over 1 million views, but this video and this one I'm doing needs to be shared as wide as possible. It needs to get the attention of the Trump campaign. Someone on the Trump team should reach out to this girl, or rather reach out to her parents. She was ignored and pushed aside by Dementia Joe. Cast aside, not even wanted to acknowledge her existence. She needs to know what a Trump rally is like. and she needs to know what Trump supporters are like and how they would never treat her like that. Let me know what you guys think, but to me, this was awful.
There are many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox, and a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to, but the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling. You take him for a friend.
Spread the word. Have you heard? All across the nation, we are going to be a great generation. Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality. We are going to be the generation that dismantles systemic racism once and for all, now and forever.
Hey everybody, join me for the next
On the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, the Biden administration is in trouble with black voters. You got a black woman here, the backbone, as they used to say, of the Democrat Party, is really understanding the 4-year hustle Democrats pull on black Americans. She also takes Kamala Harris to task about when she said that she wasn't going to not do nothing for black people. Let's go ahead and roll that.
These bottlehead hoe actually had the audacity to address black America when she has done absolutely nothing to help out black communities this entire presidency. Kamala Harris is one of those biracial people who likes to only use her blackness when it's beneficial to her. When it's beneficial to her gaining some type of political one-up. Any other time, she is more than willing to soft shoe tap dance around any type of issue that has to do with black America. At this point, can we just agree that the relationship between black America and the Democratic Party is low-key toxic? It's toxic. It really is. I'm talking about toxic in a sense to where they constantly beat and abuse us. They constantly cheat on us. They constantly lie to us. Yet somehow, when that 4-year mark is starting to come to an end, now they want to give us little flowers and little gifts and trinkets and tell us that they'll never do it again and that they're sorry and that they love us, only to turn around and do the shit again once we let them back into the office.
See, more and more people are waking up about the Democrat Party and what they have been doing to our community for the past 60 years. And as this awakening is happening naturally, there's nothing a Democrat shield could say or do about any of this, because even the Democrat shields cannot argue what you're saying. They cannot. They won't have nothing that Biden has done for black Americans. And if you're a person that never heard Kamala say this, or you can say, oh, well, she's making that up. Oh, no, she's not making it up. Let me go ahead and play this just real quick.
So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No.
Now, she said that in an interview back when she was running for president, and she was being interviewed on the Griot, and she said that. And the Griot is very pro-Democrat. And she was openly, and you know what? She stuck to that promise, and Joe Biden stuck to that promise. They have not done specifically for black people. When you remember when Joe Biden had that meeting with the civil rights bootlegs, he immediately started talking about Hispanics. And what did he do in his administration? He opened up the border and just let people flood in, and they put them in cities where black people are at, like Chicago, like New York, in particular, those hot spots. A lot of black Americans in Chicago are very upset because their resources were being stripped away from them and given to people who aren't even citizens of this country. The Democrats did that. You can't sit up here and say nobody else did that. Then now, that's why I keep telling them, you sit up here and did the Asian hate crime bill, no problem. Get out our face. Leave us the hell alone, Biden and Kamala. Leave us alone. Go talk to the Asian community. Go holler at them. Well, what's wrong with you going over there and say, hey, you know, we signed that Stop Asian Hate bill now. So, hey, we need to come out there and vote Biden Harris. Well, y'all, where's the Asian community? Why aren't y'all over there hollering at them? Y'all not saying nothing to the Asian community. I don't get this. So the Asian community can get protection, but yeah, you won't go make good on that protection and say, hey, y'all need to come. Why don't you go shame the Asian community to vote for you? You have a right to shame them because you did something for them. But yeah, you keep coming in our face every 4 years for sure. Black people, we need your help. We need you to save democracy. Go tell the Asian community to save democracy. Matter of fact, go tell the migrants that you so prioritize during your administration. Tell them to save the democracy. Go holler at them Ukrainians. All that money you gave to Ukraine, all these years, that could have been the start of reparations. Go holler at the Ukrainians to save democracy. Go holler at them. You was giving money to Afghanistan, all this extra money you're giving to Israel. Go holler at all those countries. Leave us alone, because clearly we're not the priority. But you keep coming in our face every doggone 4 years, and a lot of Black Americans to see it. And so you don't have the older generation much anymore. Not enough where you can depend on them. That's why you haven't been really focusing on them like that. The more and more these elections go along, the Democrats are in major trouble. And do you really think that you can win elections talking about reproductive justice? And I broke that down in our live stream, but let me give you the short version. When you hear the word justice, we think of injustice. That's why we say we need justice, like justice for Mike Brown, justice for Trayvon Martin, justice for Rakia Boyd, justice for Breonna Taylor, right? That's when we're saying injustice, so they need justice. Reproductive means to reproduce. You know what I'm saying? Who's stopping us from having children? No, when they say reproductive justice, they mean unaliving children in the womb. That's what they mean. It's a sick play on words. Sick play. That is not an issue for Black America at all. At all. What's an issue for Black America? Kitchen table issues, light bill, water bill, gas bill, the interest rates on credit cards, interest rates on their homes, rent prices is through the roof. Food prices through the roof. Medical insurance, car insurance, all through the roof. Well, you're not addressing any of that, which is called kitchen table issues. I've said this many times. I'm going to keep preaching that. A freaking reproductive justice, or AKA unaliving children in the womb, doesn't pay a single bill for me or any of you that's listening. Why are you bringing that to us? Like that's important to Black Americans. You never bring that reproductive justice talk to the migrants at the border. They come over here pregnant. Why don't you go tell them, hey, you know, we got a Planned Parenthood satellite clinic right here. So, hey, you need some reproductive justice. You're going to be poor having that child. It's enough you came over here poor. So, hey, come over here to Planned Parenthood and let's go ahead on and do some reproductive justice on this table in here. No, that's a message you only take to Black women, because you want Black women unalived. You want Black children unalived. You wicked Democrats, you. You don't take that message to everybody. You take it directly to Black women. And if Black people can't see that, and any Black person go along with that, shame on you, and may God himself and the ancestors curse you. Curse you for the days of your life for sitting up here partnering up with a party that wants to take out Black people. That's sick. It's really sick. But Black people are waking up. They're waking up, and it's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful. And the Democrats don't know what to do, y'all. They don't know what to do. Black men started leading the charge, moving away from the Democrats. And I said this months ago, right here on this microphone. I said it. I say, if Black men take the lead and start walking away from Democrats, it won't be long for the women to follow. And see, Black men, this is what you got to understand. It don't matter what women say to you. Women respect when Black men lead. That's it. They respect it. You don't ask for permission to lead. You don't plead to lead. You just lead. And the women going to follow, because the women don't want to be stuck by themselves somewhere without Black men. You understand? So I'm proud of y'all waking up. And I heard a young person on a podcast today talking about that people in her age group, and this is like a mid 25, 26 year old, saying that they wasn't even voting Biden like that. They say they're going to vote Trump, or if not Trump, the couch. Because those young people are sick of him and Kamala. But the Democrats at the same time have also lied. They have tried to cover up Biden's condition, and now it's backfiring on them right now. The whole country's seeing it. That's why they're in a panic, ladies and gentlemen. But shout out to this sister for waking up and calling it what it is. It is a toxic relationship. It's very, very toxic. And we don't have to put up with any toxic relationship in our personal life, or definitely dealing with no political party. We are our own people that control what happens politically. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to keep repeating it. You don't leave the Democrats to go run to the Republicans. No. You need to leave the Democrats and get politically independent in the middle and vote policy, not party.
Coffee. Follow me.